Redditors, what did that kid in your school do that will never leave your mind? So, he and his sister were both really strange, seemingly had a bad home life. They were always dirty and wore dirty clothes. I did my best to be nice to them because they were bullied a lot. I really regret it because both of them started getting really attached to me. His sister would tell me all about how they would have the nastiest, dirtiest lovemaking with each other, and that was too much for me. So, I decided to stop talking to them altogether. Her brother got really pissed and started telling everyone we were sleeping together. And then he started stalking me. He would tell me how he loved watching me sleep and that he would touch himself while watching me. I didn't believe him until one night I crawled in bed and heard a knock on my window. He was staring right at me. I got scared and called my dad. My dad grabbed a gun and chased him off. We called our sheriff friend and he kept an eye out for us for a few days. We lived in the middle of the woods pretty far away from town, and the fact that he went out of his way to do that crap was terrifying. He finally got caught by the sheriff, and that pissed him off even more. He started unaliving animals eventually and brought them to school, leaving them at my locker. He got arrested eventually, and I never saw or heard from him again. Edit. I forgot to add that I wasn't the only girl he would watch sleep. Several girls I knew told me that they have caught him watching them through their window. Oh, hey everyone. I'm sure you didn't think this is how the video was going to start because I certainly didn't think so. Oh my god. Anyway, just oh, we're in for a ride, aren't we? Anyway, next story. Story number 2. Weird kid that everyone thought was going to be the next school shooter was actually really cool. His name was Rich. We thought he was going to shoot up our school because he was always looking up gun stuff on his phone and reading books about war. He would go outside and find wild edibles whenever he got a chance. He also drank a ton of tea and always wore a surplus of German military jackets. I was kind of a friend of his, mostly because I was afraid he was going to shoot up the school, and I went to his 16th birthday party along with another friend of mine. They lived out in the woods in an A-frame type house. I actually really liked it there because it reminded me of being in the Boy Scouts again. His dad let us shoot bows and pellet guns, and then he had a pig roasting on a pig spit. To be honest, it was really cool, and we ended up camping out that night. We ended up hanging out a lot. His parents were basically just survivalists, and it made him a tad bit odd. The kid ended up joining the army and then becoming a flight medic. We are still friends and go on camping trips 3 or 4 times a year. Update. To answer some of you fine folks, the fact that I ever thought Rich could be a homicidal monster seems so bizarre to me now. I feel like such a jerk for being so bigoted in my assumptions of my fellow man. By the end of senior year, I was super into guns. I still am, and war history. I just wish I had been more friendly with him before. We had gone to middle school together too, and we could have done so many more things and hanged out together at cool spots if I hadn't been such a jerk. Update number 2. The tea comment. When I say he drank a ton of tea, I mean he brought loose tea in a tin and one of those mesh balls with a chain on it to every class. He'd drink half a gallon of hot tea each day. The weirdest part of it was one day he forgot his thermos of hot water, so he took loose leaves and soaked them in the hottest water he could get from a tap. He then took the soggy mess and packed it into his bottom lip like a person would with dip, like chewing tobacco, and this is why his tea obsession was weird to folks. Story number 3. This kid was the troublemaker voted most likely to end up in prison. He tried to fight teachers, bullied people at random, and generally both gave and got a hard time. So, it was my school's first ever computing class, brand new computer lab and all. How this kid, who I'm almost certain was failing, got into the class, I don't know. He sat next to me. I didn't care. School bullies were on my low list of things to care about, but he was quiet. He took notes. He tried. And I watched him getting more and more frustrated because the teacher never responded when he tried to ask questions, never tried to elaborate for him once everyone else understood. A few weeks in, I saw him trying to read my notes during programming practice. I looked at his screen and saw what he'd done wrong. I slid my notes across, and I silently tapped the part that he needed and went back to my work. It took me a long time to realize that he was quite smart, but had some kind of learning disability. And for that entire year, if he had questions, he would ask me. I have the ability to explain a single concept 6 different ways, and would quietly do so until he got it. We never spoke a word to each other outside of the classroom, and I have no idea where he is now, but the teacher announced on our final day that the whole class had passed. Story number 4. Man. So this kid was a strange one. Maybe something was up with him, but I don't know. He really liked Slipknot. Anyway, one day he swore he was a Wiccan. We used to have Smash Brother tournaments and invite kids over to play at a friend's house, and he showed up saying he was able to change his eye color. He closed his eyes to concentrate and he opened them, saying that they changed. They didn't, and he said they became a shade lighter. He also tried to show me how to create fireballs and had this book of different wolf pictures and tried to determine what my wolf form was. He wasn't a bad kid, but just weird, so we dealt with it until the incident. He was really into the Wiccan stuff, so two of my friends decided to F with him. I guess you can say they were metalheads and they had that look. Anyway, they told me they went up to him one day and revealed themselves as demons. One of them, let's call him Vince, said he reached out to him from down the hallway and said, "Your soul is mine," and made gestures like he pulled his soul out of his body and buried it into the floor. So the kid freaks the F out and begs for his soul back, and my friends leave thinking the dumb prank was over. Later that day, I get a knock on my door, and it's the kid. He has a pair of those sharp metal scissors in his hands, and he looks frantic. He is aggressive and tells me that he needs to find Vince and he needs to end his life so that he can get his soul back. I am pretty shocked, so I tell him that I don't know where Vince is, and the kid is reluctant to believe me because he has seen me with him. He asked me if I knew they were demons, and I told him I didn't know. Anyway, I pretty much shut the door on him, and he leaves hysterical. Supposedly, he was running around trying to find Vince to end his life and retrieve his soul, but this kid was a pretty big kid, so someone saw him running around in the streets with scissors. We don't know what happened to him. Edit. Obviously, as an adult looking back, it was an effed up situation for the kid. No one expected such an episode back then. I do hope he is doing all right now. However, it was still weird as hell. Okay, so really quick, what is wrong with liking Slipknot, okay? I feel a little called out. You know, I'm not a weirdo. I mean, I am, but I'm not a Wiccan weirdo, okay? And I like Slipknot. It's cool. They're popular. Anyway, next story. Story number 5. This was in elementary school. He got caught stealing from the teacher's assortment of goodies that she gave away once a week to students. She chose students randomly based on a raffle system where you had more tickets if you were behaved. After a huge mess of him crying and trying to say it wasn't him, he asked to be excused to the bathroom, where he was gone for a solid 30 minutes. The teacher got concerned, and upon checking the bathroom sign-out sheet, we discovered he wrote on the sign-in time, "Never coming back." So, one of us went to check the bathroom and he wasn't there. The teacher tells the principal what happened and the police are called in, helicopters are flying by and a couple of cars, and they eventually found him walking home. Edit. I just remembered another gem. In 5th grade, the one weird kid brought in a shoebox for no apparent reason. He went around claiming it was a uranium bomb. Although we knew it was pure bullcrap, the teacher sent him to the principal's office, and the dude got in major trouble for a bomb threat. Story number 6. High school drawing class. 2 kids. Girl A had known her for a while, fairly normal kid, and girl B had never spoken to her before. I was having a chat with girl A during class when girl B approaches, and she says, "Girl A, are you busy?" Then she replies with, "Yeah, I'm talking." "Oh, but can you just—" "No, please." They go back and forth, and she says, "I said no, come back when I'm not talking." So, girl A and I go back to our conversation. The same conversation between girl A and girl B happens once more. Finally, girl A and I stop talking, and she says, "Are you free now?" And girl A sighs the sigh of a lost cause. Her eyes look dead. She tilts her head and she says, "Go ahead, girl B." And then, girl B viciously bites her neck in full classroom teacher present. No one moves. Girl A doesn't make a sound, but girl B loudly, sloppily bites at her neck. I still talk to girl A, but haven't brought up that time since. Edit. I got a surprising amount of requests to ask her about it, so I gave her a call. Not the dramatic conclusion I was kinda hoping for, but she doesn't remember it. Memory problems combined with, well, to give you an idea of her friend group, we couldn't even pinpoint who girl B was. But she said it sounds entirely plausible as something that happened. And to quote her in a sad tone, she said, "Yeah, I'm kind of a doormat." Story number 7. We had this kid who had just moved out of town and come into our relatively small school in the middle of the year. He was super shy and dodgy, always shifty eyes, and wouldn't look you in the face when spoken to. We always suspected he was getting abused or something. This isn't why he stood out though. So I don't know how to put it, but he had a big chicken. I know it sounds weird to say that, but everyone knew it. And it's not like all the other boys saw it in the shower or something. It was visible in all the pants or shorts that he wore. And I don't think it was something he was proud of at all. By the way, this still isn't why he stood out. The reason he stands out was because he was a serial self-pleasure artist. He would excuse himself several times during classes and go to the bathroom. We knew that's what he did, because in the stall, he made noises, both during and when he was finishing. For those who only saw him leave the class and come back, it was very visible that that's what he did, because he would be out of breath, red-faced, and soaked a little from sweat. The weirdest thing is he would always use the same stall. Since we knew what he did in there, we naturally tried to all avoid it. One time, though, I really had to go, and it was my only option. I couldn't hold it, so I went in. Everything looked pretty normal, except for two things. There was a lingering odd smell, and the corner. The corner to the back had this little mound of what I'm assuming was caked semen from months of self-pleasuring. Our school's budget wasn't much, so the janitor, yes, one, wasn't paid much, and so things weren't always cleaned well. I confronted the janitor, whom I had shot the crap with here and there. Cool guy. I told him about the mess, and he said that he knew about it and he wouldn't touch it with a literal 3-foot broom. I was like, dude, what do you need? And then he looked me in the eyes and said, I'm gonna need about 350. And it was just then that I realized he was about 8 stories high and a crustacean from the Proterozoic era. Story number 8. A science teacher in my school was cool, if a little weird, but not in a predator type way. His room was always open for kids to hang out in. He spent a lot of his own time, and I suspect money, managing an animal club, which the kids were responsible for looking after. We had hundreds of different animals, from hissing cockroaches to snakes to a 3-foot iguana, mice to chipmunks to chinchillas. He also liked to tell cool stories about his own life, such as the pigs that he kept, Rasher and Bacon, his caving experiences, sailing experiences, etc. He would spend his own time helping students that were struggling and give them extra tutoring if warranted. However, he never tolerated laziness or attitudes and would call out students that couldn't be bothered, which is where this kid comes in. This kid made a comic book depicting the science teacher SAing the students, male and female, while saying his little catchphrases. It was found and brought to said science teacher's attention. A meeting then happened with senior management in the school where they brought the kid, the kid's mom, and the teacher in. This 6-foot massive teacher with a huge ginger beard cried and said he had never experienced anything like it in his life before now. Even the rest of us hated this kid for what happened, and at that age, we were really immature. Story number 9. I was talking to this one kid who seemed nice enough, I guess, in a study hall about Fallout and jazz and stuff. He was ridiculously into Fallout, but that's not the point. He got really attached to me, and after like a month of one period of talking, he started opening up about being depressed. He kept joking about it, but not in a meme lord way, but more of a genuine depression. He said openly in front of the teacher running the study hall that he wanted to shoot up the school and I should help him. Obviously, I was taken aback by this, and I asked him if he was serious while the teacher just stared with her jaw on the floor. He said he was serious. He said he was serious, and I told him he really shouldn't say that. And then when he realized everyone in the room had heard him, he started saying to relax and that if he was gonna unalive anyone, that it would be himself. Later, he got called into the office and they had a cop there and wanted to make sure I wasn't in cahoots with them. Turns out he had a shotgun and an old hunting rifle with far more shells and rounds than necessary in his car. Story number 10. I will never forget this day in class in 10th grade. We had that kid, and he never really talked to me, and nor did I to him. But in the dead silence of us working, he gets closer to me and whispers, "Hey man, you want a fork?" And I just looked at him bewildered. So of course I reply, "Oh, no thanks, man." And it goes back to silence for a few minutes. Then he hits me with that, "I really want to give you a fork." So to end this nightmare, I accepted. Sure as crap, he pulls out a metal fork from inside his coat and hands it to me. I'm just sitting here with this fork in hand trying to process this event. So I simply put the fork down next to me on the desk and continue working. 5 minutes later, "Hey man, want another fork?" And I just gave him this slightly agitated but mostly confused look, and sure enough, he just pulled out another fork and politely placed it next to the first one. For the rest of the class, every few minutes, he would just pull out another fork and put it next to the others. Like 5 forks in, we're getting strange looks from the students, and even my teacher noticed. I don't think he stopped it because he was really curious, and after about 15 forks, I was like, "Dude, where the hell are you getting all of these?" And he just smiled and gave me 10 more, and then slid a single spoon across the table to join them. I lost it. There was a total of 25 forks, and his coat didn't even look like he had a single one before he started handing them out. And I will never understand. I had hardly ever spoken to this dude before or after that day, and I'm still not 100% convinced it wasn't a fever dream. But my teacher insists it happened, so I guess so. Story number 11. We had this kid on my intermediate French class. He was all about being hydrated, like how some people are about being vegan or atheists or Apple users. This guy was a dogmatic fundamentalist hydrator. Had great skin. Anyways, we're like 40 minutes into a 90-minute class. Everything is going normally, but Water Senpai started fidgeting a lot and being generally weird, like trying to stable his book to the desk and stealing a fire extinguisher when borrowing another book from the shelf in the back of the room. I asked him what was up, and he said he had smoked a joint with some friends at lunch before class started, and he couldn't keep his weirdness in any longer. Well, my teacher hears us talking and asks me, "Would you like to share your conversation with the class?" And I shook my head no, and she gestured to the shape of water. Well, this kid full on stands up, takes a deep breath, and goes, "Squirtle squaw!" and projectile vomits what had to be at least 2 liters of water onto the ground. No food, no stench, just water. Well, apparently he liked to get really high and binge drink water at lunch with his girlfriend. He blamed it on his period and went to the nurse's office. Didn't mention the Pokemon reference, the fire extinguisher, which he got away with, by the way, his book being stapled to the desk, nothing. He just said, sorry, I got nauseous on my period. And then he left. So, I've heard of people getting high and having the munchies, but I've never heard of people getting high and having the slushies, the swishies, the wateries. We'll come up with a better term later because, I'm a hydro homie, okay? I go to the hydro homie subreddit, okay? So most people are 70% water. I am 71%, but just getting he squirtled everywhere. I love water, but, seems like he overdosed a little bit, but apparently he was on his period, so how can you blame the guy? Squirtle, squirtle. Next story. Story number 12. This kid was passive-aggressive to one teacher for no reason. He was generally a nice, quiet kid, but he would F with our English teacher like every day. I mean, he always did small ploys mixed with long cons. Frequently, he would raise his hand when the teacher was asking us for an answer. Then, when chosen, he'd lower his hand and look back at his book like he wasn't even chosen not 5 seconds ago. She would just sit there and look at him angrily to answer, but he wouldn't. Also, he would ask general questions that required long explanations, and while she explained, he would act like he went to sleep. After a while, she stopped asking him to participate in class. One of his major ploys was he would basically ask everyone for old-ass cell phones, ones that didn't even work, and they'd give it to him for $2. He would then proceed to act like he was on one of his phones texting while the teacher was teaching class. She would get upset and confiscate it. The very next time we had her, we had alternate block schedules, he would do the same thing. She would confiscate it every time. About 4 to 5 months in, she questioned how he had 16 different phones. He would get them back at the end of the week. They were all incredibly different from each other, and she tried to use one that she took from him. It didn't even turn on. She gave him a look, and he just stared at her with his eat crap poker face. She then decided he was just gonna F with her for the rest of the year and stopped taking his fake phones. This is when he actually started using his actual phone and would text all damn class. Some jealous female dog would get their phone taken and be like, "OMG, but weirdo kid is always texting and you never take his phone, ugh." She replied by saying he's just faking and he will not be made a mockery of. He never got in trouble for that, so he decided to change his tactics. Now, he would ask to use the bathroom and never come back to class. One time, he just walked out of our classroom, made a beeline straight for the student parking lot, and went home. She was outraged and called in a parent meeting with him and the principal. I don't know what was discussed, but the next day he showed up with a medical note excusing himself from the bathroom rule. She was pissed, but she couldn't deny him the bathroom at all. He then never went to the bathroom during class. I had him in other classes, and he never did anything. He didn't even dislike the teacher he would F with, but she was the only one that he F'd with. I still to this day lay up at night wondering why. Edit. He finally answered me back on Facebook. It was his dad's brother's ex-wife, and apparently he was to be paid $900 to F with her. He did it for free. I am in love with everything about this right now. Story number 13. Oh man, we had so many of that person in my school. So many odd characters, but here are some highlights. 1. Got expelled for drawing MLP adult content during a test. Another, when the teacher passed around a stapler to staple our worksheet packets together, he told me, "Watch this," looked me dead in the eye, then drove a staple into the meaty part of his arm before passing it on. He left it there for the rest of the day. Then, there was someone else who came to school high as a kite wearing a 3-piece suit and carrying a briefcase. The briefcase was filled to the brim with Pop-Tarts, which he ate the entirety of throughout the day. There were 2 other people that really stood out to me, though, specifically because I waited for years for them to finally get their comeuppance, because I hated them so freaking much. One was arrested shortly after he turned 18 for possession of CP content, and the other went to jail 3 days after we graduated high school for underage drinking, possession of heroin and meth, and driving without a license in a stolen vehicle. Story number 14. So, this kid was interesting. He was friends with the popular kids, always cracking jokes, a smartass, and a little disruptive in class, but he was book smart as well. He took upper-level courses in high school and liked to give the teachers a hard time, something most of them didn't expect from AP students. I guess he just liked to shake things up to embrace chaos. So, we had just finished The Great Gatsby, and we were returning our books into a massive storage bin. I turn around and he's smiling like an idiot, so I give him a nod to see what's up. He opens the book up to its first page and proudly shows me that he's written the book's spoiler. Then he closes the book, and with a casual toss, he returns the book to the bin. He gives me a wink and then just strolls off. Always struck me as an interesting move, a long con prank for some random reader in a year or two. He didn't even do it for the actual laughs, since he only showed me. He did it for like the concept, for the idea that it was funny. And then he walked out the door like Kaiser Soze or some crap. The whole time he didn't say a damn word, just smiled at me and winked. It was amazing. Story number 15. Great memory was in an English class in middle school. 8th grade, our substitute teacher was a no-nonsense army veteran with battle scars all over his face. Very nice guy. Always had gummy bears that he'd give out to kids who participated and were well-behaved. Eventually, the sub had to go to the bathroom and left the room, leaving 10 kids or so unattended. It's a small school. And one kid, Sam, also goes to the bathroom soon afterwards. Another kid, Toby, decides to take Sam's laptop, turns the volume up full, and started playing midget adult content that he had found online. Just kept on searching and clicking on anything he could find. Moans and other noises erupted, and all of us were in shock and laughing. Then Sam and the sub came back. Then Sam saw that it was his laptop and began crying loudly. This sub went off on Toby, saying things like, "If we were out in the streets, I'd kick your ass. You crude little crap, what the hell are you doing? Get the hell out of my class and go to the principal." Man, what a day. That kid was constantly getting in trouble. He was from New Zealand, only kid in the school from there, so that may be why. Story number 16. We were both seniors in high school and close to the end of the school year. Both of us were set to graduate. All the senior class was stoked to be going on to the rest of our lives. Homeboy, who I will call Bryce because I don't remember his name, but it was something like Bryce, was in math class. He was sitting in a group, and with him some of his buddies, and a tough-looking Hispanic girl. So, what's an all-American popular kid to do? Why, self-pleasure off in class, of course. So he starts self-pleasuring it under the table to his friend's growing consternation, spooges in his hand, then slaps the Hispanic girl in the face with his semen. She runs out of class distraught, and Bryce gets suspended for the rest of the school year, and is prohibited from participating in graduation ceremonies. They still gave him his diploma, though. I think he should have gone to jail for that, but schools are more lax on SA than the rest of society is. The poor girl didn't come back to class for a long time. I'm not sure ever. I remember you, dirtbag, and if I ever get the chance to F you over in that girl's name, I will. Go Vikings. Story number 17. Fairly athletic, but always weird. This guy would randomly do backflips around the hallways and odd parkour moves off the walks. This was circa 1999. Parkour wasn't really a thing yet, and he did all of this to get attention. The moves were actually impressive from a skill/technical standpoint, but it was always slightly creepy. He'd make strange eye contact with people immediately afterwards, just generally made everyone a little uneasy. Years later, he was arrested in Yemen for joining a Muslim terror group and then ending the life of some guard in a hospital. Last I heard, he disappeared in Yemen's prison. I didn't know him very well personally, but we were on the wrestling team together, so I did meet his grandfather at matches and such. The part that really makes me sad about the whole story is that his grandfather seemed like a very nice guy and was clearly trying to do everything he could to raise the kid right, but the kid was just wired differently. Story number 18. I knew a girl who put peanut butter on her nether regions and had her cat lick it off. She told a friend in confidence, and that friend subsequently told the entire school. That friend was not too creative nor clever, so I believed the story as she couldn't have come up with it herself. Another girl in my biology class was a pathological liar. She faked having cancer, even as far as tricking the staff. When finally the truth came out, she was heavily disliked and outcasted. Not that she was liked too much beforehand. My school system was in a heavily fairly rural conservative area, but there had been rumors that some of the most homophobic guys would give each other handies in the locker rooms. I absolutely believe that. In middle school, there was a girl who had gotten pregnant in the 7th grade by a boy a few grades ahead of her. By the time she graduated high school, her daughter was 5. I felt bad for her. And I remember we had an assembly in our small gym, and I glanced up at one of my friends, probably at best an acquaintance, and she was nodding off harder than I had seen someone do. It was absolutely heroin. We were in the 10th grade. Ugh, I have so many more. Story number 19. We were halfway through math class in our freshman year, and he just started crying, really bad, like sobbing. Needless to say, the class was confused. Then he stood up, and the smell hit. Just overwhelming poop smell, and you could see liquid crap pouring out of his cargo shorts and down his leg onto the floor. He was sat at the desk right next to the door and ran out of the room, leaving poopy sneaker marks down the hall. Amazingly, not a single person laughed or said anything stupid. I guess something can be said for going to a small school in the middle of nowhere in that regard. Personally, I felt really bad, but was dying holding in the laughter and gagging. Never saw him in school again after that day, and never heard any explanation. Bonus story, though. We had a really eccentric physics teacher, and one day, he brought the entire class out into the hallway and was demonstrating different laws of physics. Then he yells, "And this is inertia!" and breaks out into a full sprint only to make it 2 steps and break the heel of his shoe and fall flat on his face hard. I couldn't hold the laughter in that day. Story number 20. My high school had the typical vocational classes, auto shop, welding, and agriculture, and since this is the 21st century, they couldn't refuse to allow the high-functioning special ed kids to participate. Now, don't get me wrong, I know some very nice and smart kids with their tics. And then there was Joe. Joe dressed just like a greaser from the movie Grease. Leather jacket, tight pants, and hair slicked back and hardened into a shell. The works. He was nice and on the very high-functioning end of the autism spectrum, but his parents were rich and he was spoiled as hell. Mommy's precious little angel always got what he wanted without any consequences, and he knew just how to do it. So, we were in the advanced automotive class. It was a 2-hour block where we would do things like rebuild engines and tasks more complicated than Jiffy Lube provided. Being that I was the oldest student in the class, a senior with a bunch of sophomores, my teacher always had me help orchestrate the class and divide up the tasks. I like to think I was fair. I never ordered, but instead asked people what they wanted to do. I would offer suggestions when they looked lost, but most importantly, I was also in charge of class safety. That means I double-checked everybody's work, made sure the vehicles were properly secured and hoisted, and made the uninterested people take the horseplay out of the shop. And then there was Joe. He would get bored halfway through a task, pretend the tools were toys, using wrenches like swords, pretending pneumatic tools were guns, making jumper cables arc off of people's batteries, etc., and making an ass of himself to the other kids. I was told I had to give him tasks and keep him busy. His mommy had a meeting with the teacher about me preventing Joe from working, and he had to do something no matter what it was. I gave him some of the less complicated, but just as important tasks like rotating tires and helping to change oil. Then Joe got tired of me not letting him play. He started aiming his aggression at me. It started with simple things like refusing to do what I asked, which I was fine with, but he then escalated to outright threats against me. He started doing underhanded things like taking the tools I was using and hiding them, outright breaking some tools and blaming me and misplacing the nuts and bolts off of customers' cars. And then he got bored of that. So he decided that he wanted to end my life, and his mommy wouldn't let the school remove him from the class. It became a daily struggle to watch everything he did to make sure it wouldn't hurt anybody. Let's start a list of things Joe knowingly did to try and hurt me. Took the keys out of the lockout box and tried to start a car I was elbow deep in the engine, poured half a gallon of gasoline down my back when I was welding on a car, connected jumper cables to a battery and tried to shock me, lowered a car hoist while I was underneath the car. I ended up having to use a tire to keep the car from crushing me, chased me with the ground and hot clamps from a powered arc welder, took a can of engine starter and a lighter and tried to set me on fire, placed a wrench across the battery terminals of a car while I was working under the battery, took a pipe and an air hose and made an effing pneumatic gun to shoot nuts and bolts at me, and to top it all off, he set one of my textbooks on fire and tried to tell the teacher I did it. That would have been $250 out of my pocket, but Joe forgot that the whole class and shop was covered with cameras. Of course, mommy paid for the book, and Joe was back in class before the end of the week. This kid was seriously seriously troubled, and I'm sure he is going to end up either a serial killer or a mass shooter. This was all 3 to 4 years ago, and the name Joe still makes me look over my shoulder. Okay, so Joe is clearly insane with an enabling rich mommy, which is a life goal of mine, but on a more serious note, where were OP's parents in this story? They weren't even mentioned. Were they taking a nap? Is OP emancipated? I feel like if someone was trying to end the life of my son, I'd probably want to get involved, but OP didn't even mention them. Meanwhile, Joe is like doing like a Tom and Jerry bit where he just keeps trying to end the life of OP every class in a different way or something, and he keeps getting brushed under the rug, swept under the rug, thrown into the furnace, which is probably what Joe is plotting to do at some point. Anyway, next story. Story number 21. I'm a little late, and this will probably get buried, but in 6th grade, I moved to a new city in my province and attended a new school. I was bullied a lot as a kid at my old school, so I was a lot more open and compassionate to other kids who were frequently bullied. A few weeks after settling into my new school, another new kid shows up. We can call him Greg. Greg is seated next to me by the teacher, and I'm friendly to him but don't really get very close. Things are fine for a while. Greg is a bit quiet and odd, but everyone just kinda left him alone. Until one day when we were doing a math worksheet, when I feel something digging into my side. I look down and Greg has his plastic ruler snapped in half, the jagged end sticking into my side. Confused, I then look up at him and he is glaring at me and whispers, "I'm going to use this to slit your throat." And I kind of just wide-eyed stared at him, not sure what to do. He eventually pulled the ruler away and went back to work. So I just scooted a little more into my chair to the right, away from him, and finished my work. Then, about a week later, during class again, Greg gets up and sharpens his pencil at the front of the class. He cranks the sharpener until the teacher tells him that's enough, and he comes back to his desk. 5 seconds later, he has the pencil tip pressed into my left hand and leaned in and said, "I'm going to stab your eyeball with this and pull it out." And after this, I stood up and quietly told the teacher what Greg had been saying. The teacher asked to speak to Greg outside, and he was gone for the rest of the day. After that, he was transferred out shortly after, and much to my relief, I didn't really see him again. I don't know if there was a mental issues or abuse going on or something triggering his aggressive nature, but it still scared the crap out of 11, 12-year-old me. Story number 22. In middle school and high school, all of my friends were the rocker type. Black hoodie with a metal band's font on the back and long hair. I was never really allowed to express myself through fashion until high school. My parents always bought my clothes. I was rather hefty in middle school and told myself I needed to play a sport to lose weight and be happy with my body, so I signed up for football. Summer before freshman year, I'm working out and practicing every day with the team, so my teammates got a feel of what my wardrobe was like. The weeks leading up to the first day of school, my mom took me shopping and allowed me to pick out my own outfits. I got slim jeans, a black hoodie, and some band tees. The first day and week of school, all of my teammates started destroying me for wearing black, telling me I was fake and trying to act goth. Then that guy, who was one of my teammates, said to me, "Your hoodie is black like your soul," in the most sarcastic, condescending tone, in front of our whole 6th grade science class, who then all proceeded to laugh, including the teacher who let out a small chuckle. It was such a minuscule, non-threatening moment in my otherwise happy life, but him saying that has stuck with me. He went on to become our best defensive lineman senior year, while I was second string offensive guard. One of our last practices of our last year, we were pitted against each other in a one-on-one drill, and I absolutely blew him backwards 10 yards. No one on the team was expecting it, and he even gave me praise for it. To this day, I'm still great friends with the rocker, black hoodie wearing, long hair having guys, while that guy, along with the rest of my teammates, have gone about their lives without me in them. I'm still unsure as to why I stayed on the team all 4 years. Story number 23. The guy's name, which I will not say, perfectly fits his personality and actions. It was one of those names. You know the type. But the first incident, he would run up to kids at lunch and rub his head to get his dandruff on their food. He made a disposable camera taser and tased a teacher. That was middle school. In high school, there was a kid who would sit in the hallways drawing furry adult content. His artistic ability was good, but the content was utterly horrifying. Another kid in high school would come to school fully dressed in his Boy Scouts uniform. Another kid in high school claimed he was a hardcore gangster at the age of 5. He also claimed he was a Satanist, but couldn't name a single tenant. And then, the one fight we had at school was him fighting the furry adult content kid. The furry adult content kid threw the most pathetic semi-punch I had ever seen. I doubt the skin was even red, and pretend gangster kid bawled his eyes out. Then, the furry kid bawled his eyes out, freaking out about how he could hit another person. Needless to say, I went to a STEM high school. Story number 24. The kid was reported to have had mild brain damage at birth from a substitute teacher/firefighter friend who was 20 plus to me. Basically, the kid would steal and act out. He was a product of acting immature and behaving poorly. He became worse as he aged, so maybe product of teachers telling him he was a bad kid did not help out on top of the brain damage. Very impulsive. By ninth grade, he spent time in serious juvie, I think 3 or 4 years for something. He basically acted gangsta and criminal when he came back. His parents were rich and white, so I don't think it was the upbringing, although his sister did become a stripper, so maybe home life sucked. He was in school 2 months or so before he either went to an alternative school or was shipped back to juvie. Basically acted like he was a criminal or in a gang in a school where gang activity was non-existent. He was out maybe 3 years later, ended up with a fiance 10 plus years older. He ended up doing drugs, stabbed and killed her friend during a fight, and went to jail for 5 years. 13-year sentence, and last I read, he was out, but he may be dead or back in by now. Story number 25. Righty-o. So I was in grade 1 and I was hanging out in the playground with my best friend at the time. We were both in a pretty rural school, although it still had 500 kids and the school was on 30 acres or so. My friend had abusive parents and was later diagnosed with ASD/Asperger's. He got bullied though, hardcore. One day he snapped though, snapped in a way that I will never forget it. A dude in the class started stirring him up. Not much, but this caused my friend to start screaming. Not in tears, but pure pent-up anger for at least 15 minutes. I backed up from him a bit, intimidated as he started. During this time, he found a neck of a glass bottle that had been lying around the gutters near the school. He picked it up and started chasing and attacking other students. He had what seemed like a vendetta on other students that bullied him, and then went after that substitute teacher who was a gem but just tried calming him down. Most kids outran him, but he obviously had intentions of doing harm. He got suspended for a few days and the parents got chewed out by the principal. There was multiple incidents involving this kid later on down the track, but he left high school at grade 5 and I've never heard from him or his family since. Okay, so this story has actually just reminded me of my own somewhat relevant experience to this video, so I'll share it. So I was friends with a guy in elementary school and middle school, and we weren't just super close in high school just because we had no classes together, no lunch periods together throughout the whole 4 years. So like, it's not that we were drifting apart, it's just there was no time to hang out during school hours. But my new friend group didn't like him too much and I wasn't aware of it, and they thought he was weird. But Drew was a kind of a cool guy, like slightly weird, but nothing like off-putting. So I see him at lunch one day and I wave to him. I'm like, "Oh, hey, Drew." And he's like, "Hey, what's up, Kevin?" And then he goes inside and my friends look at me and start laughing because they thought I was doing a bit, but I was just waving at my homie. And that I remember that. I miss Drew. He's a communist now. I'm not joking. Oh yeah. He's got a communist tattoo and everything, and you know, I don't even know why he was there at that one lunch that day. Maybe he was always the weird kid. Drew, if you see this, you're still a cool guy in my book. Anyway, next story. Story number 26. She went into organ failure. A girl in my class missed a vital part of her final language exams and the teachers were freaking out. She just effed herself. She was a bit of a lazy student, so I felt she just dropped out. The next week, I'm waiting for school to open, and she walks up all relaxed, and I say to her, "Where were you? All the teachers were freaking out." And then she says to me, "Oh, it's okay, I've got a doctor's note." Yeah, that's not gonna do crap. I'm sorry, but they are so pissed. "Oh, no. It's from a GP. It's from the regional hospitals, A&E. And that has me interested. Her brother is a mechanic, and they share a car. So she was out with her niece, and after all the sweets and stuff they ate, she had major cotton mouth. She was outside her house, but saw a bottle of Ribena, a fruit drink, and opened it, put it to her mouth, took a mouthful, and swallowed before thinking, that tasted weird." So she went inside and was going to ask her brother what was in the bottle, but him and her dad were watching a football match, and her mother stopped her and said, "You know how they are when they watch the match, don't interrupt them." And she goes and does homework for 1.5 hours, and then comes down later and asks what was in the bottle. It was car coolant, antifreeze. She was rushed to the hospital and went into full organ failure before they were able to bring her back. She's laughing as she finishes telling me this, and I'm just there jaw slack. And let's just say the teachers didn't say anything about her missing the exams. Story number 27. I cannot even begin to list all the crap this one kid has done in the 4 years I've known him, but I will try. First, he has some kind of sixth sense and can detect the slightest pressure on the back of his chair, which pisses him off for some reason. So, some girl walks in wearing all black with a yellow circle on her shirt that says, "Not normal is beautiful," or something like that, and a yellow frill at the bottom hemline. This guy leans over to her and says, "I like your Batman outfit," and she politely tells him it's not a Batman outfit. Silence in math class. A girl's writing on the board trying to figure out how to do the problem, and this guy effing shouts, "We get it, you're a thought!" Silence falls in the classroom. The girl looks like she's going to cry. Then there was English class, individual project about the 1930s, and each person picks a topic. One person per topic. And this guy goes effing mental because someone picked transportation before him and he wanted to do trains. Starts yelling for 10 minutes. The teacher eventually calms him down by letting him do his project on trains. There was another time where he got extremely frustrated trying to tie his shoe in class. Entire class watching, some filming his fruitless efforts, and asks me how to tie a shoe. I don't tell him. He gets pissed and hits me on the shoulder as hard as he can several times with his oversized binder. Then there was hat day. He steals my hat. I eventually get it back and I start avoiding him so nothing worse happens. He gets mad at me because I'm avoiding him, and he's wearing a jester hat with the little bells. He grabs his hat and effing beats me with the little bells. Then, not to mention the everyday stuff, 20 times a day he'll shout out meaningless answers to questions. Math teacher asks a question, he shouts out tacos. Science teacher needs an answer, death. Offhand mentioned that if a school shooter showed up, he'd have his way with a certain female student's body. What the hell? And that's the stuff I've witnessed. I've heard loads of other things from other people about this guy. I was told he threw an effing chair at a teacher, threw a stapler at a student, threw another stapler at the same student, shoves people around for unknown reasons, and he effing smells every day. You cannot touch him without attracting flies. He's apparently supposed to be going to the counselor to take his meds for it, but he just doesn't go, and she just doesn't give an F. So, oh well. Someone get this guy out of here seriously. Story number 28. A very intelligent but socially awkward kid that was a grade or two behind me always lived a block away from me. He was pretty badly bullied, and I was a misfit, so we became friends. I guess the guys in the locker room were doing all kinds of crap to him, including swirlies. His mother sent letters to the school and contacted law enforcement. Absolutely nothing was done. This was a small town, but the biggest in our county, and my graduating class was like 75 people. But I guess one day, he'd simply had enough. His tormentors had him dangling over a toilet bowl with piss and crap in it. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cheap little Swiss Army knife, and just started flailing. He managed to get his main attacker a couple of times and ran. This kid was huge. He was a meaty, strong farm kid. My friend was a lightweight. The bully ended up with what amounted to a cat scratch on his cheek and across one hand. My friend was arrested, expelled, and told he was never again allowed to come on school property. I lost touch with him after that. The school didn't do anything to stop bullying, but they did ban backpacks in classrooms and start doing random locker checks, which was all stupid because their security measures had nothing at all to do with what happened. And the bully's punishment? A week out of school suspension. His dad took him on a fishing trip. Story number 29. Dude, that kid could have been any of us. Unfortunately, it was him. In my high school, they would make us play over the line in PE, which was a safer and lamer way to play baseball that allows for less people and less space. Basically, it's just the pitcher and the batter, and instead of bases, the batter runs over the line before the pitcher can get the ball and tag the batter. This is the story of that kid, the batter. That kid was a freshman who was trying to make a name as an athlete at our school. He was thrown a ball by the pitcher and tried to hit it extra hard to show off. With the perfect pitch/perfect timing of the hit, the ball flew exactly back the path it came. The ball hit the pitcher directly in the chest. The batter apologized profusely, and the pitcher joked about it and brushed it off. Immediately afterwards, 30 seconds to a minute, the pitcher collapsed. The school ended up having a helicopter land on the football field to fly him out, but it was too late. The boy passed away. It was his 16th birthday and apparently had a heart condition that would normally allow for someone to not have to participate in PE. That kid accidentally killed a fellow student, and honestly, no one could ever forget it. It was the perfect storm for no one to ever let it go. Not to mention a good portion of the school watched it happen. Story number 30. I'm really late to this party, but I have to add a couple of mine. First, a dude I dated freshman year got caught senior year effing his girlfriend behind metal shop during class. There is nowhere to hide out there, and the PE teachers frequently had people run around the school. They would have had them run right past the metal shop yard. Also, it was within eyesight of where the teachers and principals parked their cars. I also heard multiple people say that they saw him fingering her during class movies. Thank the gods that I never did anything more than kiss his nasty ass. Second, two of the fairly more popular guys in my grade, let's call them Randy and Stifler, pulled off a stunt that has gone down as legend. This happened in 2008 and kids still talk about it. Seriously, imagine my surprise when my younger brother and sister came home from school one day in 2015 talking about it. Anyway, Randy drove what we call a creeper van. Seriously, it was white and had no windows in the back and everything. And he did this because he always had his dirt bike back there. I don't know why he didn't leave it at home sometimes and drive a regular vehicle, but I digress. He and Stifler were always talking about all their escapades, living the brap life, and acted like they had found jobs riding dirt bikes after we graduated. So, I didn't really enjoy eating in the commons area, so I would frequently sneak through the senior locker bay. Not allowed food in there because of the new carpet that was installed in 2000, and I did this to eat outside by the science wing because the science teacher always made sure the door was open so I wouldn't get locked out. I saw them and a few other guys grouped up around Randy's creeper van. It was odd, but who am I to question the doings of teen boys? So as I start to head back inside, I notice there's another friend of theirs at the back doors, seemingly keeping lookout and making sure the door doesn't lock them out. So now I'm 100% sure these idiots are planning something. Now, our vice principal was the person responsible for trying to keep us all in line and dole out punishments. She was very diligent in her pursuits. Obviously, nobody really liked her. She was an older woman, 50s or so, with a terrible short haircut, with a bad habit of wearing brown slacks, and she named her car Peaches. I wasn't a troublemaker, but I did not like the VP from the few encounters I did have with her. So, the bell rings and I leisurely make my way to my next class while trying to see what these guys are up to. Eventually, I can't wait any longer, so I go to class. Then, after 10-ish minutes, I hear excited voices in the hall. Students weren't supposed to be on that end of the school during lunch because of classes going on, so I ask my oblivious teacher if I can use the restroom. He has no clue anything's up, so he lets me go. As I exit the room, I hear it. The telltale grumble of a dirt bike in the next hall. So I dash across the locker bay in time to see Stifler on Randy's dirt bike racing down the hall. Randy and Stifler decided that it would be so epic, which wasn't a thing back then, if Stifler rode Randy's ever-present dirt bike through the school. I joined the crowd following and watch it in disbelief as Stifler almost runs over the VP because she is literally leaping in its path, mistakenly believing he'd stop. She liked to do this with cars in the driveways as well. Luckily for her, a dirt bike is easily maneuverable, and he zipped around her down to the other end of the school and out the door. I guess during this time, Randy had taken his van and parked it on the street at the end of the school driveway. He and Stifler didn't come back to school all week, and I heard the VP tried to get them expelled. After that didn't work, she tried to prevent them from graduating, but all they got was suspended for 2 weeks. Randy's dad was so pissed that he took the van away and made Randy ride the bus for the remainder of the senior year. When they came back from suspension, they were met with applause and cheers outside the office. Story number 31. I want to preface this by saying that this guy is a third-year college student. He used to crap in our showers, but this isn't even the story. So, we're all in class when suddenly we hear a deafening sneeze. Everyone in this class of 40 plus turns to see this guy. The table in front of him is coated in a thick layer of snot, which is also on his arms and dribbling down his face. The professor begins taking attendance and the snot-covered guy just sits there. Everyone just assumes he is waiting for the professor to be done so that he could go wash up. We were wrong. Once the professor finishes, he begins licking the mucus off of his effing arms. A few of the girls sitting next to him nearly vomit as he laps up the disgusting treat like a desperate dog licking a dirty plate clean. But he's not done yet, as there is still a crap ton of snot left on the desk. He takes his pointer finger and scoops up a gob of it before sucking it clean like they were covered in sauce after eating at Buffalo Wild Wings. Apparently, his thirst for boogery goodness was unsatisfied, and he began scooping up gooey handfuls of the stuff, lapping it up from his hands, apparently having the time of his life. The worst part is that everyone sat and watched the entire time in stunned silence. Nobody knew how to respond to this horrific event, not even our professor. It was like watching a train wreck. We just couldn't look away. I was struggling so hard to read this with a straight. Oh my god, that's so disgusting. But like, how do you describe that? That was horrible. Next story. Story number 32. I never knew who the kid was because I assumed he was expelled and the name never made it around when people talked about it. But I was in orchestra class, which was in its own building in the center of the courtyard of my high school, and then we saw a SWAT team in formation with assault rifles going across the courtyard to the other side. I found out later on the news and in school that apparently Dude A was talking to Dude B's girlfriend. Dude B didn't like that, so the next day he had brought a handgun to school in his backpack and sat next asked dude A and showed him what was inside his backpack, and warned him again not to talk to his girl. I'm not sure how he was able to alert the teacher without dude B knowing what he was doing, but was able to let the teacher know, and that's when the SWAT team got involved. Then there was the other kid back in elementary school that lit a trash can on fire in the boys' bathroom that had the same first name as me right after school was over for the day. The school admins apparently just called the parents of the first person with my first name, which was my parents, and then called them back to apologize and say they meant to call the parents of the other kid who had the same first name. My mom said she was getting prepared to whoop my ass until she got the second call. Okay, so really quick, I don't want to spam these narrator commentaries, but I have a similar relevant story as well. I'm Kevin, and one time in elementary school, they call me to the principal's office for no reason. I'm like, what the hell? So I go there, I sit down, and they're like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm Kevin. They're like, no, we need Evan. I'm like, oh. So I go back, and I say, Evan, they want you to the principal's office. He's like, okay. I never saw Evan again. I don't know what happened to him, but they were about to kill me, but they took him out instead. And now I'm alive. Rest in peace, Evan. You a real one. You and Drew. Anyway, next story. Story number 33. I'm late to the thread, and this will get buried, but it still pisses me off, so I want to share. In 8th grade, a very popular girl accused a not very popular country boy of following her to the bathroom and SAing her during the school day. The day and time she claimed the incident happened, she was in my English class, and when she came back from the bathroom, she said nothing and seemed fine. It was after school at home when she made the claim. It was investigated, and everyone was convinced the dude did it. Then, about a week later, I was in a stall and heard her and her friends laughing because it wasn't true. When they left the bathroom, I immediately went and told the counselor. A few days after, he returned to school and charges were dropped. I guess she finally admitted to the lie. The poor guy was never looked at the same way, and people continued to call him an SAer. I tried to make an effort to be nice to him, but he was understandably very standoffish. Nothing at all happened to that stupid little female dog. F you, Joni. I hope your life sucks balls. Story number 34. We have this one kid in my class in 12th grade. He was really weird in general, but that one day was very creepy. We had to go to a different classroom for some reason, so our usual sitting formation situation wasn't applied. This kid usually sits in front, but this time he was sitting in the far back. A classmate who was sat next to him saw that he had written Bible phrases all over his arms and papers, but that looked like a usual oddity, so everything was cool. Later, we were all reading an article, and this dude stands up and hops like a bunny to the other side of the classroom with a piece of paper in his hand. My teacher gave him a questioning look, but he was just full-on creepy and smiled at her, and he went back to his chair. Some time passed, and we were still reading until that weirdo raises his hand and asked if he could go to the restroom, still having that disgusting smirk on his face. My teacher let him go. The dude took his backpack with him for some reason. The classroom we were staying in was in another building and had a view of the whole schoolyard. After some time, we could see him running around with his backpack on. My teacher called him back in, and after some time passed, my history teacher knocked at the classroom door, having this kid with her. She was talking about how he lost himself in the school until this dude interrupted her, screaming at the whole class that we can't F with him. My teacher led him out of the building. We later looked at the paper that he placed at the window side earlier. It said that the middle age was the blooming time of our beliefs in Christ and that Jesus is going to get us and will take revenge. It took 4 months until we saw him again. Story number 35. I tell this story as often as I can. This kid I knew from art class invited a ton of people to his graduation party, basically flyered the school. My friends and I went. The party was mobbed with a ton of people that I wouldn't have expected to go. The kid was very geeky and weird, but he was just chilling and everybody was having a good time with barbecue and water balloons and such. I sort of thought he was trying to prove a point that he could pull off a good party, and I thought he did. He disappeared with his girlfriend and another girl. Then they came back. He was in his underwear with a cape on and panties on his face. Both girls were in their bra and panties with capes too. Guy announced he was Thong Man and they had a superhero fight in the yard. Everybody at the party watched in silence. People started to leave. The group ran back inside. Me and my friends started to get ready to go too when the guy came out and he was like, "Hey, sorry, I needed to do something inside. Did I miss anything?" Story number 36. More like the teacher who will never leave my mind. Middle school. We were making these little wooden Christmas trees, and if you were done assembling yours, you were allowed to grab some small ornaments from a box in front of the classroom to hang in your tree. One girl accidentally damaged an ornament and put it back in the box with the others when the teacher was gone and grabbed an intact one. The teacher came back and decided to help a boy choose a couple of ornaments from the box. She found the broken ornament and started yelling, stunning everyone in the class. "There were no broken ornaments in this box. Who broke it? Tell me or you're all staying at school till 5 p.m. Nobody replied. We just stayed silent. And at one point, the teacher got so pissed, she threw an ornament she had in her hand across the classroom, and miraculously, it landed on the projector that was hung from the ceiling in the middle of the class. 10 seconds later, though, it rolled off the projector and landed down on the head of the boy sitting right under the projector. Mind you, the school was about 300 years old, and the ceilings were like 15 foot high. The projector was quite high up. The ornament was a glass bead/ball about the size of a marble, and the kid was fine, but he started bawling, and that made the teacher apologize, and we were all allowed to leave while she consoled the kid. Story number 37. He kept stabbing himself in the stomach with a pen whenever someone looked at him. Details if interested, we were maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I thought it was such a strange thing to do, because I had seen him only do it when he saw that someone was looking at him. I decided to ask the teachers about it, and they told me to ignore him. I decided to do the opposite and checked him whenever I thought he couldn't see me. In the end, I saw him holding the pen to his stomach and scanning the room until someone looked at him, and he just stabbed away. There was barely any damage, just some red marks where the plastic scraped him. When that failed to get him the attention he wanted, he decided to state whatever he could, that he was diabetic and brought a bag of sugar to class and ate a few spoons of it and pretended to faint. The teachers freaked out and carried him to the nurse's office. A few days later, he came back to class and told every single person who would listen to him that he almost died, and that he had been in hospitals and spoke to someone about his feelings. I only knew he was faking it because he kept opening an eye to see who was around. I found out later that some other friends saw him do this, but they thought it was a part of fainting. I approached him after his attention died down and asked why he did it, and he proudly claimed that he wanted to die. I immediately disliked this and made it my duty to make him happy and like living. We became good friends, and as far as I know, he hadn't really tried again during the time we were friends. But I had to move about 2 years later, and all I could think about was me leaving him and if it would affect him, and I wanted him to keep being happy. I brought him up to my mom a few years ago, and she told me that she was friends with his mom, and she told my mom that he was obsessed with documentaries and movies about people who get hurt and their family are all around them when they wake up in hospitals, and how people were so caring and careful around them afterwards, constantly checking on them and seeing if they're okay. It hit me pretty hard when I realized that he wasn't really craving attention from people. We were living on an army camp, and a lot of fathers were gone for most of the year. His dad was a pretty high-ranking official, and he was around maybe once or twice a year for a few weeks. I realized that he was trying to hurt himself so his dad would be at his bed when he woke up. Utterly heartbreaking. Really sad, and I hope he grew out of that and got the help he clearly needed. Due to this kid, though, I am always saddened by self-harmers and furious at fakers. Story number 38. So, throughout secondary school UK, we were all segregated. It was 2011, yeah. We had 2 bands in which students were placed. S band is where all the smart kids went. They did half of their GCSEs a year early and were given the chance to do 2 AS levels, like an A level but not quite as good. The other band was J band. This is where they put the rest of us. In most of my J band classes, we had this poor kid with severe learning difficulties. He had autism really bad. He was a nice kid, but he'd do a lot of things that you normally wouldn't do. The most notable one is every lesson he would stick his hands down his trousers and start fiddling, and he'd always do it while intently staring at the same girl. Since we've left school, I've become friends with this girl, and it turns out there was a lot of things she didn't know were happening. It even got to the point where this autistic kid had printed off her Facebook profile picture and taped it to the back of his locker. When I told her about it, she freaked out. Understandably so. Story number 39. This kid in elementary school would explode a packet of ketchup all over himself every single day at lunch. It was a small school, about 30 kids per grade, and every day at lunch was baffling. Some days it was hilarious, and some days we were all like, why? He'd get his hot lunch, which usually came with tater tots, sit down, pick up his pack of ketchup, you know, the kind with the serrated edges for easy opening, and proceed to squeeze as hard as he could inches from his face. This is the point the rest of us would either be warning him about his past actions or cheering him on, depending on the day. Whatever reaction we were having, this was also the time to put up some kind of shield or vacate his area. Pop ketchup all over his face and clothes. Every day. We figured he'd seen enough of us open a ketchup packet safely to know he was doing it wrong. We still have no idea why he did it. Story number 40. This is a bit long, but hopefully worth the read. This happened about a year after Columbine. New student gets transferred in midway through the year, having been kicked out of private school for attacking a girl and breaking her fingers. He gets through 11th grade, and on the last day, we were to give presentations about what we enjoyed in our English class the most. He goes up front with a duffel bag and pulls out a gas mask and starts starts to cry about how our teacher hijacked his year and she deserved to be punished. He just starts rambling and pulling out all this military crap from the bag. The 15 or so kids in the class start shifting to the back of the class. We were scared crapless. The teacher sent us out one by one through the back door as this kid keeps hysterically ranting until it's just him and her. Then he sits down like nothing is wrong, and he didn't return for 12th grade. Apparently, he's a lawyer now. Excuse me? Am I reading that part right? This man is now upholding the law? I had a really close friend become a lawyer, and he sends me this form that you have to fill out, kind of saying oh yes, this is a trustworthy person. They can do their job well. You can trust them to uphold the law. So this lawyer guy probably had to do that too. So someone out there approved a psychopath to defend you in court. Oh my goodness. Oh boy, good luck for those people. Next story. Story number 41. We were walking into science class once. This kid with very little common sense came in and walks to his place at the back of the class next to the window. A class from a few days ago were making copper sulfate crystals and had left them on the windowsill to form. This effing kid goes up to them, goes, "Look, they're blue," and decides that eating some would be a sensible idea. Bearing in mind the teacher did not see this. 10 minutes into the lesson, he excused himself to the toilet and did not return for 10 minutes. When someone was sent to the toilet to check in on him, they came back saying that he was throwing up and proceeded to tell the teacher what the boy had done. The class then turns into chaos as the teacher is sorting out the kid to go to the hospital, and everyone else is laughing and talking about the stupidity that they had just witnessed. The kid went to the hospital and came to school the next day fine. He told us he nearly had to get his stomach pumped, and he was lucky he didn't eat anymore. He was actually a really funny kid, but that moment of stupidity has kept him with me for months. Story number 42. I have one, except I was the weird kid in the scenario, and this is something I still look back and cringe on. As a 4th grader, I vaguely remember seeing Cocky Romano on TV at my dad's house, and the term piss ant stuck in my head. The next day at school, I decided to write a letter, to no one in particular, containing all of the curse words that I knew. Mind you, the letter made absolutely no sense, but it was addressed to piss ant, and I thought that crap was cool. I show all of my friends. We laugh at how cool I am, right? Then I toss the note in the trash. End of the school day comes and my mom and stepdad are there with the principal because their crazy-ass daughter articulated a nonsense letter with a bunch of terms like crap female dog and effer, and I was floored that they found the note. Turns out some stupid girl had tattled on me, and my school did not find it funny. As a bonus, that girl also tattled on me for forging my mom's signature on a report card a couple of years later. Story number 43. Johns Hopkins 2000s. This is entirely a true story. Feel free to Google around. So, the undergrad campus is situated quite close to the hood, and gangbangers, etc. usually leave your car unlocked so nobody smashes the window to get into it. Just let them freely fish around for a whole bunch of nothing. Lots of robberies, lots of muggings. It had been a bad few years, and a girl from the school was viciously SA'd and murdered. They couldn't find the suspect at the time, but they eventually nabbed him, and a year later another student gets his place broken into, also murdered. That one never got solved. In Johnny Hopkins versus the Baltimore Ghetto, the ghetto was crushing it. Johnny Hopkins needed a win, but all she had was anime nerds. Well, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. We had a voracious anime enthusiast who was naturally a samurai sword collector. Anime nerd comes home, his precious anime-laden laptop has been stolen. He calls the cops, but he has a gut feeling the thief is still nearby. He must reclaim his anime and his honor. He hears some thug from the hood rustling around in his garage. Now is the time for some justice. Johnny Hopkins style. He rolls out into the garage with his samurai sword, and the dude holds up his hands, and this kid looks him in the eye and slices off his fingers. The thug steps closer to the samurai anime guy, and he freaking samurai swords the guy in half and kills him. After that, people didn't mess with Johns Hopkins as much as before. Story number 44. Our school always went whitewashing in the middle of the night for homecoming. If you don't know, whitewash is a mix of lime, caustic chemical, not the fruit, and water. It makes a pretty good temporary, semi-permanent white paint, and we'd go all over the county painting stuff like "Go Team" and "Eat Crap Pit" all over the roads. You know, typical homecoming slogans. Depending on traffic and the water to lime ratio, it would last anywhere from a few days up to a couple of months. But it would always wear off on its own and did not do any damage to the roads. The only rules were to keep it reasonable, respectful, and keep it off of school property. One year, that kid decided he was going to go rogue and really show the school admins that teenagers deserve to be allowed to do fun things for homecoming. So he shows up on school property in the middle of the night with a bucket of white paint. Like, went to Lowe's and bought a gallon of outdoor white paint. He painted the F word in 3-foot tall capital letters across all 3 lanes of the entrance to the high school, which incidentally was on a slight hill in clear view of the school's office. He even bragged about doing it, which is the only reason the entire school didn't get in trouble. Amazingly, the school did not kick him out for it. He was banned from participating in any school activity, though, and he got lunch and weekend detention for the entire rest of the school year. Homecoming is in the beginning of October, and he spent all of that time with a small brush and a can of paint thinner scrubbing the road every day until it was gone. Then, doing chores around the school every day after that, and if he refused any of that, the school was going to press charges for trespassing and vandalism. He picked up trash, cleaned windows, scrubbed clean bathroom graffiti, weeded flower beds. I even saw him chiseling gum from under the desks in an empty classroom one day when the weather was bad. Story number 45. There was this one kid in my middle school. Boy, was he a handful. His name was Colin. Now, Colin was the kind of kid who overcompensated for being very short and small by being very loud and overspoken. He definitely sat somewhere on the spectrum, but had pretty overbearing parents who would have never admitted to that. Colin was that kid in middle school who was very rude to everyone but didn't have any friends. His attempts to befriend people usually ended in shouting matches and him screaming at people. This eventually got a rouse out of everyone, and people just started to mess with him. I mean, like my entire class. No one liked him because, well, he was flat out mean to people. So he started claiming that he was being bullied by my group of friends. I will say that I sat somewhere halfway between trying to be nice to the kid and telling him to shut the hell up for going on about something. So Colin really starts to get defensive to the whole "I'm being bullied by everyone" outlook that he's given himself. Starts to do crazy crap like go up to groups of kids on the schoolyard and instigate fights with them to get them in trouble. But I'll never forget the 2 times he intentionally sabotaged himself to make someone else out to be a bully. First, one day he walks up to a classmate, David, in the lunchroom. Now, David hated Colin's effing guts with a passion and would argue constantly with Colin, but would rarely concede to anything I'd call serious bullying. But Colin took his argumentative outlook as personal attacks and would always take it 5 steps further. One day, the little craphead he was shows up to our lunch period, sits down right next to David, and just starts railing into him about why he's such a bully to him, why he's the reason he has no friends, etc. Turns out Colin brought over a recording device to try to get David to incriminate himself and bully him on tape. Well, the argument went more along the lines of Colin telling David to go F himself and calling him a slew of other insults while David was just like, "What?" at the situation. So an hour goes by and the principal comes by and grabs David from class. Turns out Colin brought his tape to the principal to rat him out for bullying him. But instead, the teacher was worried that David was in fact being bullied by Colin, and Colin was given a 2-day suspension for secretly recording another student and for all the profanity he used to insult David in his recording. It was a horribly executed plan. Now, the second one was equally as vindictive. Colin got into an argument with another classmate after school got out. In a fit of rage, Colin smashes his own phone on the ground into 100 of pieces. It was a smartphone, and this was like 2007, so these boys were expensive. And then he gets up and squares up with a classmate who is about 3 times his size. Colin's mom comes to pick him up and immediately starts raising hell at school, screaming and yelling at the group of kids that he just accosted, yelling at administration to expel these bullies that won't leave my son alone this instant. Well, that didn't quite end like that. The student who he got in an argument with calmly told the administration Colin had came up to him, yelled at him, pushed him a few times, and then smashed his own phone in a fit of rage. Colin tried to tell his mom and the school that the other student had smashed his phone, but there was tons of witnesses that saw him blow up into a fit and smash his own phone. So he ended up getting suspended again for fighting and lying. The kid was a piece of work. The last I heard of him was in our senior year of high school when he walked up to a freshman in the parking lot and tried to yell at him over something, and the small freshman just clocked him, totally unprovoked. It felt good to watch justice be served to that little punk years later. Story number 46. I've been waiting my whole life for this question. So, that kid was nuts. He would fight everyone one day, be buddy-buddy the next. May have had problems, but he lived to prank. In shop class, he would cut out chickens with the jigsaw and glue them to the floor and the teacher's door. I mean, like, daily. Before the afternoon, the staff would scrape off the ones they could find, and many of them they couldn't. He also got his last initial branded on his back by his buddy while he was restrained. It wasn't right enough, so when the pain came, he clenched and effed up the brand. It was a mess of lines between his shoulder blades. Instead of quitting there, he doubled down and got it rebranded, harder and darker on the same spot not long after. Kid had like 5 goats too, and he'd sneak them into school. Nobody knew why. He helped orchestrate a senior prank to disassemble and reassemble the vice principal's Volkswagen bug in the cafeteria. We did the science project to build a structure to project an egg as we dropped it from the second story. Well, he just brought a carton of eggs and slam dunked it off the edge, yolk splattering the ground. And his most infamous prank, he would crap in Pringles cans. He would take these cans and hide them in classrooms all over. As the stuff got older, it would create gas, building up until a few days later, it would then pop the top off. You can imagine the ripeness of his ticking turd time bombs. He got caught one day crapping in a can during shop class. There was no reason for him to do it there, but like a serial killer, I think he wanted to get caught. Story number 47. The year was 1975 in the Southeast United States. I was in the 6th grade. It was a Friday and also show and tell day for our class. We had a substitute teacher and she was doing her best to keep us in line, but we were all excited to start the show and tell session. Eventually, it was time for show and tell, and I only remember my presentation, which was a wooden bear that my grandfather carved, and my friend Curly's presentation. Curly was a skinny kid and sat directly across from me in class. He was wearing plaid bell-bottom pants and was the last one to go for show and tell. He obviously had not brought anything to show, but he went up to the front of the class and stood behind the table. He then climbed up on the table and proceeded to put both of his legs behind his neck and then stood and walked around on his hands. We had all seen him trying to do this on the playground, but seeing him totally pull off this contortionist thing on the table was pretty cool. Curly then returned to his seat amidst cheers from us all, and the substitute teacher was busy trying to get us calmed down. Sitting across from me, I noticed Curly fidgeting and tugging at the inside of his pants leg. He was flopping his foot side to side, staring at me as if he wanted me to maintain eye contact. But I couldn't because his fidgeting had released from his plaid bell-bottomed pants a tiny marble-sized dookie ball which rolled out into the middle of the floor. I was the only one who saw this happen. The substitute teacher was talking and noticed the dookie ball. Stooping over, examining Curly's excrement, she exclaims, "Okay, class, who's been eating Tootsie Rolls?" And she had picked it up barehanded, and much to her horror, quickly threw it in the trash and exited down the hall. I'm guessing to the bathroom to wash her hands, or vomit, or both. Meanwhile, Curly and I maintained eye contact until she returned. Story number 48. One kid brought in some kind of pills he stole. He gave them to another kid who took them not knowing what they were. He was acting really weird after that. I remember seeing him sitting at lunch table by himself just licking the table repeatedly. We were on third lunch, so we were the third last group to be in the lunchroom. Those tables weren't cleaned very well in between lunch periods. I just remember him being totally grossed out by what nasty food and germs that could be on that table. And not too long after that, his parents got called and he was sent home. Another girl was bullied a lot. She was heavy from a poor family, so didn't dress that great. She had frizzy hair, glasses, and some acne. I was never mean to her and never actually spoke to her much. She wouldn't have gotten bullied so much if she didn't act so weird, be a total female dog to everyone from day one of transferring to our school, and if she didn't lie so much about stupid crap. She always wore these cheap white canvas lace-up shoes. Well, one day in junior year, she came to school and she had drawn flame designs on her shoes in marker. She tried to act like she didn't draw it on, but they were bought like that as some new cool style. She never lived that down, and being teased about flaming shoes followed her for the rest of the year and the next to graduation. Okay, so what were those pills that caused someone to lick a lunchroom table? Did OP not, investigate further or not want to know? Because I feel like I would have looked into that. Or, no, I was shy growing up. I would have asked one of my more extroverted, outgoing, inquisitive friends to see if they did any research, and then I'd be like, hey, what'd you find? But I don't know what would induce somebody or cause somebody to do that, so maybe somebody in the comments has an idea. Anyway, next story. Story number 49. Kid in my class was the dumbest person I ever met. Despite being tested multiple times, he didn't have learning difficulties. He just didn't give a crap about learning anything. At 12 years old, he literally didn't have any concept of numbers outside of basic counting. I will never forget a math class where we were learning about equations and how to know what order you do things in. So the teacher says, with this question, the first thing we'd do is add 4 and 6, then multiply the result by 5. So what's 4 plus 6? The kid didn't know. The teacher thought he was effing with them and wouldn't let it go. Literally got to the point where he was holding up his hands and showing them on his fingers. He still didn't get it. But the thing I'll never forget is science class in the UK in the early 90s. One of the things they teach you is how to wire an electrical plug, how to know what fuse to use, etc. I wired mine, was talking to my friend, when there was suddenly a bright flash and a vzz and a sound right next to me. The kid had wired his own plug, taken the plug from the person next to him, plugged them into an outlet, and touched the wires together. When I turned around, he was just sitting there with two partially melted wires in his hand looking, well, shocked. The teacher went absolutely bat crap crazy at him and dragged him out of the room. The kid quietly moved schools a few days later. Story number 50. This will get buried, but in my biology class, I sat next to the weird kid. He was quiet, had black emo hair, was tall and lanky, etc. One of those quirky artist types. I always did try to talk to him because he didn't seem to have any friends and wasn't like a terrible person, but I think he liked being a loner because he'd always do awkward things, which I assume he tried to do to get me to leave him alone. Anyway, we had biology bingo. Basically, our teacher made bingo boards with the names of subjects that we had been discussing, and she'd read out the definitions of the words and we'd put a chip on the word. It was a game for studying purposes, and this guy starts ripping up his bingo card, makes eye contact with me, and starts eating the pieces. I remember laughing because, like, what else do you do? I remember the teacher being upset when she got the boards back and was missing one. Story number 51. This will most likely not be seen by many, but I have one. This kid was a bully and had rage like no other. One day in home ec class in middle school, he started sewing his hand. Like, he poked the needle in and out of his skin in the palm of his hand. He made a circle, raised his hand, and said something to make the entire class look at it. The teacher threw a fit. About 2 months later, I sat in the seat next to my boyfriend at an assembly. The same guy came up and stood in front of me, looking down at me. I was very intimidated. He told me to move, and I said no. I sat down first, and I want to sit next to my boyfriend. The next thing I know, he put his gargantuan hands around my throat and started to squeeze and shake me. I managed to turn my head to look at my boyfriend, and he was laughing. People were watching, but nobody was doing anything. And then it went black. When I came to, the principal had walked all the way up the stands to see the guy was still standing. He didn't see what happened, so he just told this guy to sit down and walked away. On the bus ride home, I told my older sister what happened. She ended up telling the principal. The next day, the guy got called to the office, and I haven't seen him since. So, just a really brief thing that I want to say. OP did not refer to her boyfriend as the ex-boyfriend because after something like that, I feel like that definitely puts you worthy of the X category. You were laughing while she's being Bart Simpson choked out in the middle of the bleachers? Break up with that boy. Next story. Story number 52. In 6th grade, there was this girl who always wanted to be the center of attention. Chronic liar, too. She would constantly make up stories to try to butt into other people's conversations. Like, one day she'd have both parents, next day her mom was dead. Day after that, her dad was dead. Day after that, back to having both parents. She was annoying as hell. One day, we were doing popcorn reading of the history textbook, and she was reading literally every other turn and would take her turn for longer than the teacher had specified. This went on for a while until I guess the teacher stopped spacing out and realized what this girl was doing. So the teacher calmly said, "Why don't you stop reading for a while and let some of your other classmates have a turn?" And with no warning whatsoever, the girl stood up, screamed, threw her 25-pound textbook across the room, narrowly missing another student, and then ran out the door screaming. We never saw her again. The teacher never spoke of her, and no one ever asked, so nobody ever found out what happened to her. Is this not the most poetic story that we've read so far in this video? The girl who always wanted to be the center of attention. Nobody cared about her enough to ever figure out what happened to her. Just forgotten in the annals of history. Bye-bye. Next story. Story number 53. We had a special needs girl in our gym class, sophomore year, and whenever we would play a game, we'd let her get a home run, kick a goal, etc. We also had a kid, Flynn, who was just an awful kid. I could go into it, but this is the worst of it. Earlier in the year in this class, he had guarded a few girls and got way too close. When the VP came to bring him down to the office, he tried to run away, but the VP just grabbed the kid. Anyway, towards the end of the semester, we were playing a version of baseball where we use our arms in place of a bat. After, we let the special needs girl hit a home run. He started yelling at all of us on his team because we should have been trying to tag her out. Next time she was up to bat, he rushed the ball that she hit, looking to hit her, so the girl who helped the special needs girl asked her to stay at first, worried that Flynn would come and get her out. Angry that he couldn't get her out, he stood between first and second bases. Unfortunately, that's where the next ball went. He picked up the ball and drilled it into her face, and he started chanting, "No special treatment!" And one of the basketball players in the class came over and just punched Flynn into the ground. We called the principal, and we all decided that no one needed to know what the basketball player did. Flynn was transferred to another gym class for the last 2 weeks of the semester. Story number 54. Not sure if this is going to get buried, but it's something I'll never be able to unsee what happened, and I might as well put it here. This dumb kid in my 8th grade class was using a pair of scissors to cut a paper clip. You read that right, scissors on a paper clip. I don't know, man. Anyway, the scissors slipped, no crap, and effing gashed this kid's finger. I was looking in his direction anyway, because how could I not watch this stupidity? But then got an unfortunate view of a fat flap of skin hanging like a ripped glove off of this kid's hand. Blood everywhere. My teacher, and kudos to her, immediately grabbed and replaced the useless flap of human tissue over its original spot and started to compress the wound. She looked at me and said, "Go get help," and I burst out of the classroom like a bat out of hell and sprinted to the next classroom. I busted in like a Dane Cook B&D and just shouted, "We need help now, we got a problem." Entire class looked at me like I was an idiot. Then the teacher got his crap together and came over to help clean up and calm the scared child. God damn, dude. My teacher, and kudos to her, immediately grabbed and replaced the useless flap of human tissue over its original spot and started to compress the wound. She looked at me and said, "Go get help," and I burst out of that classroom like a bat out of hell and sprinted to the next classroom. I busted in like a Dane Cook B&D and just shouted, "We need help now, we got a problem," and the entire class looked at me like I was an idiot. Then the teacher got his crap together and came over to help with the cleanup and calming people down. Big ol' sheesh, but we had a couple of periods off due to blood, so that was neat. Story number 55. Very late to the party. 11th grade, I had become somewhat close to this girl. She was in 12th grade. We were spending a lot of time together as we were both in a play. We had a lot in common. We were both superb students, very artsy, and she was dating the calculus teacher. I was dating the physics teacher. That being said, although we were polite to each other, we didn't get along all that well. Similar personalities crashing, perhaps. It was almost the end of the school year, and she tried to commit self-unaliving. Her mother thought it was because her father was too pushy to get her to switch her religion to his. She was Catholic from birth, the dad was a Jehovah's Witness, and that day she argued with him. Maybe it was the straw that broke the camel's back. She jumped off of the 3rd story of her house. Luckily, she survived, but she's now wheelchair-bound for the rest of her life. She continued on to college to become a fashion designer. She married her boyfriend, not the calculus teacher, and they have a daughter. I'm not sure how she is doing. She's not very active on social media, and I'll direct message her later, I think. Story number 56. I have a couple of short stories about this one kid and a longer one that I can add if anyone's interested. I will call this kid T. T flirted with my current girlfriend a lot, and a lot of other girls too. He continued to flirt with her after I started dating her. Eventually he stopped, but he still comes over and says weird crap to my friend group during lunch. T is also friends with my girlfriend's ex. When my girlfriend broke up with him, his friend, not T, said some really weird things to my girlfriend that made her worried that she would kill him. He moved away, but he came back to visit his friend, and my girlfriend couldn't sleep for a few weeks because she didn't know exactly when he was over. I can provide more details on this story if you want. Then my girlfriend was in T's psych class, and he bothered her a lot. Multiple times, she has told him that she doesn't like him and has told him to F off, but I guess he doesn't realize that she's actually serious. Then T sent my girlfriend a video on Snapchat of his cousin with the caption, "My cousin has bigger boobs than you do," and my girlfriend has very small breasts that she is self-conscious about, and she was extremely uncomfortable because of this. I don't think T actually realized that it's not acceptable to say something like that. He isn't a mean person, he's just creepy. T also wore a ghillie suit to school. I have no idea why this happened, but it was interesting. I'll add more things if I can come up with them. Story number 57. In high school, the stoner class was computers class, and the teacher was this real soft-spoken, straight-laced dude. He was like 5'2", always dressed very nice, but was quiet and meek. He was a lot smaller and shorter than most of his students, and not really cut out to be an authoritarian, especially to troubled high school kids who seemed to gravitate to his class. So he took a lot of crap. Kids were always pranking him. All the classic pranks and then some. Kids stealing mouse balls, tying all the chairs to the ceiling, super glue on his chair, examples of laxatives in his coffee, sawing part way through his desk legs, potato in his exhaust pipe, TPing his house. Someone even installed some kind of software on his work computer that would continuously surf random adult content websites when the screensaver went on, which were logged by the administration. He never really seemed, though, to get mad or stuck up for himself. The two pranks that I won't forget were done by this guy named Ty. The first one consisted of self-pleasuring on a folded piece of construction paper, which he then taped to the teacher's office door. The second one was also done by Ty. Ty gave himself diarrhea by taking a laxative, probably X-Lax, crapped into a bucket, then poured it into a 2-liter bottle. He then placed it into this large vent or cold air return in the classroom with the cap off, and screwed the vent plate back on. It took them 2 weeks to figure out what or where the stench was coming from, completely closed the room off for most of that time, and we were unable to do any work since there weren't enough computers anywhere else with the AutoCAD software. Story number 58. Went to a really small boarding school, about 30 kids total from ages 14 to 18, and we'd do this really cool camping trip every few months. Well, in 2015, we went to do a week-long whitewater raft trip on the Snake River in Idaho. Long drive to get there, but the trip was overall amazing. A day before leaving, a rumor starts that a kid, we will call A, forced himself on a kid, we will call J, and force gave him a BJ. As the last 2 days of this trip go on, we decide if it had happened, A would have been sent home and kicked from the school. Skip forward to our return, and we have an announcement that both A and J are in this weird punishment called off track. Basically, you are only allowed to interact with staff unless a class required group work. Well, the rumors start up full swing, and everyone is furious at A. He also made it very clear he was gay, along with just doing crap to piss people off, like play the banjo as loud as F at 6 a.m., so he didn't have very many friends at this place. A few days go by of Jay telling us about how traumatizing it was, and everything, and then a group meeting is called. Turns out Jay, who always would talk about how many girls he's had lovemaking with and basically just seemed to be your stereotypical heterosexual, had initiated the BJ with A. He then lied to make A seem like the bad guy, knowing most everyone hated him anyway. Jay seems devastated that this came out, and we all feel like a-holes for accusing A of forcing this on Jay. In our next class, Jay asks to go outside for a moment to cry, and the teacher, his first day there, says just stay within sight. Well, Jay booked it. No staff could find him, and police were called. Jay was 16. It took 4 days to find Jay, and the fire department found him in a crack house that burned down. He ended up being sent to the state hospital. Never saw him again. Story number 59. This kid was probably on the spectrum, but was never treated how he should have been treated, and it devolved to one of the craziest and longest stories I have ever had. This kid I knew in high school, we will call him BT, was super y'all and gangly, had horrible acne, and was generally every kid's worst puberty nightmare. Freshman year, he was relatively okay. There was obviously something up with him, but we just figured he had Asperger's. Once or twice, he would say something a little off about death or about lovemaking, but we ignored it. He was also super overly confident, like the kind that it's obvious that they have no confidence at all but are faking it till they make it. Then sophomore to senior year, everything was downhill from freshman year. I can't remember what years are what, but I know there's a list of things this kid did that will always freak me out. 1. When he had his first girlfriend, he would actively pressure her for physical contact, like pretty aggressively. His girlfriend was so meek and shy that she would cry if she was called on in class. So obviously, she didn't handle this stuff well. I think her friends convinced her to break up with him because we didn't see them together after a while. Story number 2. His first ever weird thing to happen was that he would be caught self-pleasuring in the bathroom in classes. He would openly self-pleasure in the bathroom so often that they had to take the doors off in the men's restroom. In class, he would put his hands in his pockets and do it through there. Some kids thought he purposefully cut out his pockets so he could have skin-to-skin contact. And BT eventually showed her his story, and the story was hyper-detailed, bondage and alavert and all. Needless to say, BT once again got into a lot of trouble over it. Number 4. BT eventually learned of his budding bisexuality. There's nothing wrong with being bi, but BT didn't necessarily understand boundaries. He walked up to this male underclassman at lunch and declared his love for this kid. This kid was not homophobic in any way, but he was definitely not gay. The kid denied BT and went his separate way. The next day at lunch again, BT walks up to the table this kid is sitting at and sits down next to the kid, grabs his face, and forces the nastiest kiss I've ever seen on him. Open mouth, lots of gross tongue, everything. This kid was so mortified he couldn't do anything. It took a bunch of other students and the dean of students to drag BT away. And finally, number 5, the culmination of everything. BT left school for a while in our senior year. At first, no one really noticed, but then days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months. People figured that he had dropped out, but nope. It turns out that he was in a psych ward getting treated for mental illness and numerous self-unaliving attempts. We all felt bad that he felt that way, but when BT came back at the last month of school, it was almost like he was worse than before. He started talking about hit lists and hurting people. He started talking about how he was someone's prison wife in the ward and how he bled numerous times when they had lovemaking due to no lube. Overall, a pretty weird dude. I don't know what he's doing today, but when I last heard, he was dating an underage girl. Story number 60. This is probably gonna get buried, but I had to share. I went to a very small school with a large number of pranksters. We actually sent a couple of teachers on stress leave. There was one boy in particular, though, that was a real threat. For those stories, I will call him Sam. In 8th grade, we had a substitute teacher for half the year because our teacher was on maternity leave. Every day, Sam would ask to use the bathroom as politely as possible and then spend the next 30 minutes of class wandering the hallways, making sure to peep in our classroom window from time to make faces at his classmates. Our substitute teacher caught on to this pretty quickly and soon would no longer allow Sam to use the washroom. One day, Sam asks the teacher to use the washroom, and of course, she says no. Sam exclaims that he has explosive diarrhea and he has to go right now. And he really did look like he was gonna crap his pants. Finally, the teacher relented and let him go. Of course, for the next 30 minutes, we saw Sam walking up and down the hallway, making sure to stop at our window from time to time. The sub-teacher ended up quitting after about a month, in large part due to Sam. In 9th grade, I'm going to my class after the lunch hour and no one knows where Sam is. Lots of people saw him at the beginning of lunch, but no one saw him at the end. But also no one saw him leave the school. The teachers are perplexed. They call us home, get no answers, and figure he maybe went home sick and just hasn't arrived there yet. We're about halfway through class when we start to hear some light banging in a cupboard at the back of the classroom. The cupboard door flies open, Sam rolls out, gets up, yawns, stretches, and then takes his seat. Oh boy. Then in the 10th grade, we got a fancy new school that had TV screens in the hallways that would play a slideshow about school events and display pictures from past events. One day, Sam learned how to access the slideshow that plays on the TVs and changed all of the slides. I can't remember all the changes he made, but the one I remember the best was the ones about the pancake breakfast we'd had a couple of weeks earlier. The original captions had been something like, delicious pancakes, and Sam changed it to, disgusting pancakes, which I found hilarious because the pancakes were really gross that year. I probably have 100 more Sam stories, and he really made school less boring. Story number 61. There was a kid in my high school who clearly wasn't all there. It was very well known that he mixed up reality with fantasy a lot. There's a few stories about him I got. First off, he would stand directly in front of the clock and dead-eye stare at it from the moment he arrived to when it finally struck first bell. After beating this clock in the eternal staring eye contest, he would then proceed to Hadouken shoot it with a fireball, while saying fireball because that's how his powers activated apparently. Another time, a few kids were teasing him and stole his book bag at lunch. While he chased the bag person from person to person, he would run in a weird shuffle motion, just barely putting his feet in front of each other, while swinging his arms stiff, straight wildly forward and back. After the teacher intervened and got the bag back, he turned around and said some weird made-up words and yelled at all the kids that he had cursed them for life and that they will die in horrific manners. Lastly, he tried to fly. Now, this is more the other student's faulty than it is his, and a group of kids were on the 3rd floor and saw him walk by. They teased him that if he was magical, then he could survive jumping from the 3rd floor. Now, at my school, all the academic classes were in a circle and overlooked the front foyer with the middle taken up by the auditorium room. So, not every side was viewable. This particular side was in a back corner, and the only way to view it would be from the floor looking up or being on the 3rd floor looking down. After being told he wouldn't survive jumping down, even if he was magical, he countered with he would in fact be able to fly instead. He clambered over the rail and was tackled by a teacher just in time. Story number 62. It was lunchtime in cafeteria, and this French kid has blonde hair and freckles on his face with a pair of glasses, sits in front of me across the table. I always save my food best for last, and that day was a chocolate chip cookie. Mind you, one cookie. As he finished his food before me, he snagged my cookie and walked proudly out of the cafeteria. I wasn't a big kid back then, but it still makes me question myself. Did he just take the one thing I look forward to all day? In fact, the only thing keeping me sane from going to school every day without one day absent is because my parents won't ever allow me to do. Anyway, I still took time to finish my food and walked out thinking he wouldn't dare eat it. I searched for him for about a good 10 minutes and saw him grin at me with these pale lips and corners of his eyes, and I asked nicely, "Where is my cookie?" And he said, "I ate it." Without another word, the sudden flash memory of me and my brother wrestling violently, all mixed with anger in my eyes. So I chokehold this kid and lean myself backwards where he hangs with his feet off the ground with only my arms and chest holding his neck. Other students around me gasped, and I let him go, and he coughed and fell to the floor, and I said, "Don't you ever mess with me." And he wimps and said, "It was only a cookie." And students around me all question, "Only for a cookie?" But to me, it was a stop to any potential bullying from this twat to me. And revenge for my cookie. Edit. By the way, English is not my first language. Please forgive my bad grammar. Story number 63. There was a time where my high school went to China for a summer trip. It was about 10 days in 3 different large cities. I believe we were in Beijing, and mind you, we are teenagers. We were coming up to our senior year, so I think the oldest of us was 17 at best. And said 17-year-old was a weird kid. Always wore this black overshirt and a gray tank top. He looked like if he was a GTA character come to life. Like, he always looked a little hot, even though he always had some form of a buzzed haircut. Anyway, I digress. We're in China. We're staying at a hotel in Beijing, and it's like 2008, right before the Summer Olympics. It's like China on its prime. It looks great. At the same time, there's a bit more guards. I don't know what's the normal amount of guards they had, but it was noticed that they were present. So, that kid has a great idea, and he thinks to himself, let's open the windows to the hotel we're staying at. Yes, the one we're like 14 stories up staying in. Yes, I know we're in a foreign country on the supervision of 2 adults that are down the hall, and he proceeds to jump out of it to land on, I kid you not, a concrete pillar. It was crazy and it was cat-like. The pillar was like a weird decorative pillar that stood up about 10 feet below us. There is no doubt in my mind if he did not land the way he did, he would have easily fell to his death and missed. At the very least to his broken feet or legs. Everyone cheered him on, which caused one of the supervisors to come and check up on us. At this point in time, that kid was scaling it down by kind of hugging it down until he got back to the lobby. We had to go get him because he didn't jump with his key card. The most surreal part of it, if you could believe it, is that it wasn't even the highlight of the trip. The next day we saw the Great Wall of China, and that was the talk of the trip for that day. As if that kid's life wasn't just put in jeopardy hours beforehand. If any police officer saw him, if he didn't land on that pillar, these things for some reason keep me up at night. Story number 64. I was in art class freshman year and the teacher wasn't around one day, and this guy blew his nose into his hand. It was the biggest glob of mucus I had ever seen come out of a single human head. Like, at least half a cup easily. So everyone is flipping their crap and laughing, so he starts chasing this one really pretty girl around the classroom with it in his hand. Tendrils of snot dangling between his fingers. Everyone is laughing at the disgusting absurdity of it all, even the girl, until he finally corners her and wipes it on her bare forearm. She stands there frozen for a minute with the Patrick Star meme expression on her face, because even though he joked about it, nobody thought he was actually going to do it. The art teacher walks in about this time to see a group of kids standing there, wide-eyed, the guy giggling like an imbecile, and the girl frozen stiff in shock with her arm held out like Slimer from the Ghostbusters had just finished having lovemaking with it. The teacher sends her to the bathroom to clean up and then sends the boy to the principal. Unbelievably, nothing ever came out of it, and nobody ever mentioned the incident ever again. Story number 65. We took a school trip to Boston for our sophomore year of high school. We were from Louisiana, and the kid in question was a guy from my class who feasted off of attention. One day, we're at Boston Market, I believe, and one of my buddies buys a pair of panties for his girlfriend that says, "I heart chicken" across the butt. The guy in question had brought one of those rubber horse masks to wear around Boston, except his was white as a unicorn. Like I mentioned, it craves attention. And an idea is born. My buddy who bought the panties told the guy it would have been hilarious if he wore the panties over his jeans along with the unicorn mask. The guy was all for it. There wasn't even an exchange of money for what he was about to do. What's worse, after adorning his garb, he took it a step further and began to prance across the long stretches of Boston Market with these panties and unicorn mask on his everyday clothes. Nobody expected that, but nobody from our class was surprised all the same. I can't say the same for the shoppers and the dirty looks we got. It still irks me to this day how embarrassing that was, and I wasn't even the guy who did it. Story number 66. He would make upside-down peace signs and claim they were sentient creatures known as tweets, which he would bring out anytime he chased students around the playground. He also enjoyed using his hands to explain how the tweets made it. He also had a doorknob with googly eyes glued on it that he named Nub Nub. He enjoyed chasing us with that too. We eventually came to the conclusion that Nub Nub and the tweets were the results of his parents trying to teach teach him about the birds and the bees, but they used fictional creatures instead. During gym, he was always one of the last people out of the locker room because he was busy jumping up and down in his tighty whities while talking to himself. And he dropped out of elementary school in the 5th grade because his parents didn't like the fact that so many people made fun of him. We would always end Boy Scout meetings with the prayer, "May the great Scoutmaster of all good scouts be with us till we meet again. Amen." And his father forced him to quit because he thought we should be praying to God instead. I'm not sure who he thought the prayer was referring to. Then he came back to school in 8th grade, and for the first few days it seemed like he had changed. It became readily apparent that, if anything, he was worse than he was before. He had become an enormous fan of rap and viewed Eazy-E as an idol. If he saw an opportunity to freestyle, you could be damn sure he would take it, no matter how many times we told him his freestyling skills were dog crap. He started insisting that people address him as B-Dog. His real name was Bobby, and he insisted on referring to me as K-Dog. I'm not disclosing my real name on Reddit, but obviously it starts with a K. He possessed an intense hatred of Muslims too, and wished death on them frequently. He claimed to have mellowed out by junior year. Nobody believed him. He soon became a heavy stoner, and he once bragged about the time he got caught smoking weed in the house. His mother practically begged him to stop, so he went out to the local cemetery and smoked a joint there. He thought this brave act of defiance was the single coolest thing in the world. He also wasn't picky when it came to drugs. He once claimed to have gotten high on nutmeg after searching the kitchen for things he could snort. Then he once bragged about the time his mom spanked him for flashing his sister. Then his life goal was to develop video games, and he was intent on moving to Japan once this inevitably made him rich. He didn't know a word of Japanese. The game that he thought was going to make him rich would have been a simulation of school shootings. Over time, it started to get more elaborate. You could do all measure of horrible things to the students and teachers, and he especially seemed to relish in the idea of tying them to a table and sawing them in half. This idea eventually morphed into a game where the player was to break into a kindergarten class and begin spanking their children. Again, he thought this would make him rich. There was also the time where his father made the mistake of introducing him to H.R. Puff Snuff, already into weed, and he soon became obsessed with the show, bringing it up every chance he got. Continuing, we were trying to guide him to the classroom one day while he was blindfolded. We warned him that he was heading straight for a display case, and he walked face first into it and shouted, "Jesus Christ, dang it, why didn't you tell me where I was going?" And the teacher was standing about 20 feet away. Then he once bragged about the time he had a threesome with his drug dealer, his only real friend, and a prostitute. After a while, he quit the threesome so he could sit back and watch. And finally, he joined track despite having no athletic skills and made the mistake of trash-talking one of the other members. The dude turned around and punched him in the face, which led Bobby to hiss at him like a cat in response. Okay, look, I don't condone violence, but the few stories that we have read where somebody gets punched in the mouth, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you kind of deserved it. Or at the very least, I'm not surprised it happened, and at some points throughout this video, I've been surprised it didn't happen. And not regarding the weird people, but some of the people who are like rude and disrespectful or have done something rude and disrespectful. I'm just like, oh my goodness, you are begging for retaliation for some of the horrible things you're doing and tormenting your fellow students. So, you know, if you get socked in the jaw, I can't say I'm entirely sympathetic to some of the people we've read about. Anyway, next story. Story number 67. We all had a kid who we all called Drew Peterson. He just kind of had this evil going on underneath this all-star persona. He found out about the nickname and said it was a compliment. Here's a few highlights. Freshman year, he talked a band girl into letting him film them having lovemaking, and he made it into a DVD. This was 2006. He then gave a copy of the DVD to another girl to show her what he could do. It got passed around like wildfire. Those who saw it said it really resembled American Psycho, with him mugging for the camera. This was back before sexting cases became headlines, so no one reported it. Then he worked as a Little League umpire, hid knives in his padding in case parents acted up, and at a barbecue party, someone was standing next to a shed with a throwing knife landed in the wooden wall next to their head. They looked over and saw him cheering for himself and laughing at their reaction. Then there was a sleepover party before a drill team competition. He brought Hills Have Eyes to watch. We weren't too into it. And then he kept replaying the SA scenes and the sicker crap. Wide smile, watching it in detail as the rest of the room was actually sneaking out. And finally, a science teacher casually told a class that John Smith, the laid-back jock in the corner, got the high grade for the last test. American Psycho Boy tells the teacher he is wrong. Recheck the scores. He then escalates to yelling and standing at his desk, demanding a recount. He's walked out. He switches science classes and tells everyone it was politics. Story number 68. There was a guy in middle school who did a whole bunch of stuff ranging from weird to dangerous. Let's call him Brody, because it sounds douchey enough. One time, Brody left a Pikachu toy on the ground in the hallway. He hid behind a corner, and whenever a kid would approach the abandoned-looking toy, he snuck up on him, jumped on his back, and whispered in his ear something along the lines of, "The truth has been revealed. You are a traitor and a hazard to this nation." At least, that's what he whispered in my ears. A year later, Brody got his kicks out of inhaling the gas you fill lighters with, then dropping a knife from the second floor waiting for someone to walk right into it. Luckily enough, the only kid he hit had the handle drop on his leg. Same year, he decided to fight random kids with spoons. You could either run away and hope for the best or take a spoon and get into the fight. One kid was stupid enough not to run. Brody, the experienced spoon wielder, hit him on the head multiple times with the edge of the spoon, and as a result, the kid was bleeding like crazy. And if I remember correctly, he needed some stitches. It was about 20 years ago, so my mind could have spiced it up. And the last time I heard about Brody was when he gathered about a dozen like-minded idiots and lit a lot of garbage cans and containers on fire throughout the city. It wasn't a sign of rebellion, a protest against corruption or whatever. It was just because the most fun a middle-aged psycho can have is watching trash burning and melting. Story number 69. This will probably get buried, but I had a girl in my geometry class who threw up on the wall trying to hit the trash can. You could tell she wasn't feeling too great as we were getting closer to the end of the class period. Out of nowhere, she jumps out of her seat, runs to the trash can, and completely missed her target, instead covering the wall above it in the tomato soup and grilled cheese lunch that we had just had an hour or so earlier. She immediately ran out of the classroom and down the hall to the bathroom and threw up again down the hall. The sound it made hitting the tile floor mixed with the smell that was now lingering in the class, it prompted mine and a few others' gag reflex. I couldn't explain how relieved I was that the bell went off not even 2 minutes later. I feel bad for her. Had to be one of the most embarrassing moments of high school for her. If only she was able to hold on for a few more minutes. Students in our class never let her live that down. Story number 70. So, my freshman year of college, I lived in a dorm complex. They were two smaller dorms that were grouped together, so our key cards worked for both buildings to promote a sense of community. We gravitated to one of the buildings as a hangout because its lobby was better, and it had a kitchen area so we could cook and watch movies, play Smash Bros, etc. One day, I'm coming back from class and heading to the main dorm room when I see a couple of fire trucks and firemen in full gear swarming all around the outside of the building. Crap is going crazy. What the hell is happening? Well, turns out that this really sweet girl, let's call her Barb, had dropped her phone in the toilet. She fishes it out and decides that she needs to dry the whole thing out. To be sure, she gets every nook and cranny. She takes the phone apart. Back in ye olden days, you could do that, and she puts it in the damn microwave. After it's been there for a couple of minutes, she opens the door and thick smoke starts billowing out immediately. She slams the door shut and freaks out. So instead of calling an RA or literally anyone else, she just leaves for class. So moments later, someone goes to the microwave and opens it, and the smoke just pours out, and this person calls the RA. But they didn't close the door in time, so the smoke alarms start going off, and everyone is evacuated, and the fire department comes. We never let Barb live that one down. Story number 71. I'm late, but I've got a few. Primary school, a few of us went to the toilet all at once. Normally not allowed, but roll with it. Then, that kid proceeded to say, "Hey, watch this," and takes a crap in the urinal, much to our disgust. We went back to the classroom, explained what had happened, and got our breaks and lunches taken off of us for not stopping him. Then in high school, after PE, a few of us had used the wrong locker room because we used to swap between the buildings at random, and we'd got there early and just headed in. Lesson goes as normal, then at the end we head back to find it locked. We go to the teacher to ask him to unlock it, and instead he gives that kid the key. He puts it in the door, tries to turn it the wrong way, tries a few other keys, and then like the Neanderthal he was, decides hoofing the key to try it and turn it was a good idea. Snapping the key in the lock and locking out all the clothes and stuff in there until the next day when they could finally get a locksmith. And finally, from another high school, short but funny, we had a guy with a nervous twitch who was built like a brick crap house. On several separate occasions, he both sneezed and slammed his head into the desk and twitched and slammed his head into the desk. However, the golden moment was his phone going off in class in his bag beneath the desk, which, rather than apologizing and turning it off, he decided to fix by repeatedly stomping on his bag until it went silent. I swear I wasn't in a special school. Story number 78. I have way too many stories on this. I grew up in the second worst school district in the US before moving across country junior year of high school. The following all happened in middle school. So, first, the band teacher had a daughter who attended the same school. One day, about halfway through the year, as class is about to start, we walk into the band teacher's daughter having a four-way, female, male, 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 in her father's classroom on the little stage thing. They didn't stop until the teacher came in. The dad had to be dragged out into the hallway by the cop for the beating he was giving those kids. Next, sitting at lunch, some kid ripped a girl's shirt right off her body and burned it right in front of her. Someone stood behind her and prevented her from getting up until the end of lunch. So she had to sit there topless for all of lunch. Last I saw, she had to buy one of the school shirts from the office to cover up for class. Next, every day at my locker, there was a much larger 17-year-old black dude who was probably 3 times my size, with a full beard, who brought a gun and put it in his locker every single day. Keep in mind, this is middle school. The kid had failed more than a few times and was naturally huge. Then in 8th grade, we had a health class at the end of the day. The teacher was a little old lady, probably in her 80s, just trying to get by, and understandably, you had to be pretty tough on the kids at this school. And the kid who always sat next to me didn't like that. He ended up bringing his dad's hunting knife to school and tried to end this poor little old lady's life. It took 3 kids to prevent him from getting to her, and the kid stabbed the hallway cop after being jumped by 3 more. Last I heard, he went to prison. And finally, in 8th grade English, there was a couple of boys who, a couple of times a week, would attempt to face F their friends and the girls who walked by. For their friends, they would grab their friend's head as they walked in and shoved it into their crotch for a few seconds. The kid doing it usually got hit afterwards, but he still laughed his ass off. The bigger problem came when he started doing it to the girls in the class. He would actually unzip his jeans for them, whereas he didn't do it for his guy friends. Kids are effed up. Story number 73. He built a working bomb, minus the battery required, on a dare that he took to school to show how smart he was, only to have an older student take it from him and hide it in a bookcase, thus leading to the school getting shut down because of a bomb threat, because the idiot didn't want to be late to class. So, story time. Note that I am partially giving some events secondhand when it comes to what happened when he showed it off, but I was there for the rest. So, the kid in my year who wanted to show off to people how smart he was and made it clear he had a grand future ahead of him, to the point where he would outline what steps he would take to take over a country, start a nuclear weapons program, and then harm the world to take over. He liked to try and impress people with his smarts, but also wanted to show how much of a classical education he had against what others had. Examples of this was when others would talk about sports or their interest in Nintendo and PlayStation, he was focused on just the finest books of philosophy of the like, or other examples of refined taste. Meant that people didn't mind him much, but he rarely drew himself close to anyone. Well, other than a group I was sometimes in who had been into nerdy things, he liked that they discussed some of the things he was interested in, but disliked that we didn't move to a better spot because he had to stand. This meant that he would kinda clash with an older student from 2 years above us who he seemed to view as an uber nerd. The uber nerd was such because he built his own PC, this was the 90s, and had a job that paid for it. Guy was generally a pretty chill person who liked games and the like, but didn't care to show his IQ. He did have a natural gift for making people feel easy with things, but did kind of talk his mind about things, and would use the fact that he was older to throw his weight about things and impress people on what was getting in his way at times. This mix is why Bomber Boy wanted to impress him like he did, leading to the time he outright stated that he knew how easy and simple it was to make a bomb if he wanted, thus the whole setup for the dare. That day, it started normal enough, even if he was late coming in because he overslept and passed it off as he was working on extra credit homework. Since he did sit next to me, he said that he had something to show off to Uber Nerd to prove that he was right. I told him that it better just be something that might make a little noise, and that was it. He said that doing that would be pointless, as if you built something like this, it would need to impress. I pointed out that a firework impresses without needing to go close to it, unless you're an idiot. He said he wanted to show me, but I told him that unless it was the size of a rubber, or an eraser for Americans, that he better not show it. He kept pushing, saying he wanted to show me. I said only if it was about the size of a glasses case, so the teacher or others wouldn't worry if I saw it. But it was larger than that, and he suddenly went to put away his bag when he worked out he should have tried to make it look like something. Cut to lunch period. At this time, I leave with the others in the sports class to do some bowling, because golf wasn't offered this term, and he goes up to Uber Nerd to say that he has his bomb to show off. Uber Nerd tells him to show it up in the library. The remaining group goes up there to see it, which Bomber Boy sneaks in with a stack of folders he had with him. They go to a corner, sorta mostly out of sight, and look at it. For the record, the bomb he made was the size of an A4 folder and just as thick, done in wood paneling to give it that classy look, and was more or less put together with everything in it, minus the bats to set the timer. Not sure what he made it with, but the bomb squad sure as hell said it would have made a nice sized hole if it was just slightly more real. Anyway, so the Uber Nerd ran in the way you would in a library, silently and walking, before hiding the bomb in a stack of books. Bomber Boy had been hot on his heels and didn't notice what happened to it when he did catch up. So when the bell went off a minute later, he went into panic mode and left it be as he rushed to class hoping this whole thing would blow over. 10 minutes later, a bomb alarm went off in the school, and everyone had to go and stand on the grassy area near the library. Yeah, they later worked out that that was not the best spot, so they shifted the location to a different spot that wasn't as near the buildings, since they've only had everyone meet there because an older principal was lazy AF. We later found out that one of the librarians found the device when she went to put some books back. She saw it, took it to their office, and tried to work out what it was by going to open it. Oh, the days before 9/11. When they worked it out, a quiet call was made downstairs, and everyone but the head librarian got the F out of there. She remained to make sure it was isolated and no one tried to do anything to it. Another teacher went up with her to make sure she had someone to talk to and act as a relay. It took them an hour to work out what to do in the meantime, so everyone who had been excited to miss out on class found themselves bored crapless soon enough. Add on to the fact that no one was allowed to leave until almost near 5 after sitting out in the sun for a few hours made sure few had been impressed with the whole thing. More so since it took some time for the cops to come and even longer to get the bomb squad in from elsewhere. Next day, Bomber Boy wasn't back at school, and word is that he was given the chance to change schools with a clean record. Uber Nerd was crapping bricks that they would come down hard on him, but nothing happened about it. Oh, and there was 2 called-in bomb threats, one of them by another student who wanted to F with someone doing a test run of their HSC, and main positive from it was that the school got to do a test run of their evac plans out of it, and fixed the many mistakes they noticed with them, so that was nice. Story number 74. There was a boy in my high school, a sophomore while I was a junior, and he had a crush on another sophomore girl, who was a pretty good friend of mine. He was weird, there's no other way to describe him. My mother was a substitute teacher at my school, and she had him in an international relations class where the assignment she had to give was a quiz on countries in the Middle East. This kid wrote Afghanistan in every blank, including bodies of water. Something about him did not sit right with her. My mom has a really good bullcrap meter, and she even went as far to describe him to me as school shooter weird. This will be important later. A few months later, this kid is stalking my friend. He's naming playable characters in video games after her. He's following her around school. He's treating her as his girlfriend and telling her he loves her, despite her never showing any interest in him. She has a boyfriend at this point, a freshman kid who is a nice person and also a complete badass. Now, the scary kid and my friend rode separate buses, but all the bus kids waited in the same hallway. My friend was freaked out by this kid, so she asked her boyfriend to wait with her. Scary kid confronts boyfriend. They start verbally fighting over my friend, and they nearly get into a fist fight. Thanks to my friend, that didn't happen. One thing you should know before I go on, my school is tiny. About 345 students, is a Christian institution, and it costs about $15,000 per school year. Scary kid is mad at this point. His bus arrives, he gets on, and as he does, he tells another friend of mine, "Wouldn't it be funny if I brought my dad's gun to school and shot boyfriend in the face?" Now, this friend he told is the sweetest boy ever. He also can't keep a secret to save his life, so he told the proper authorities, and Scary Kid was brought to the dean and the principal. Y'all, he straight up told school authorities that he planned to shoot my friend's boyfriend and SA my friend. He said that to their faces. He was expelled after that due to concerns for my friend's safety. Story number 75. I was the victim of the kid, let's call him Jake, who became that kid during one of his psychotic episodes. Whilst in kindergarten, we were doing arts and crafts, and Jake was a little too excited about arts and crafts. He would go around stealing crayons, glue, erasers from the other kids, and Jake would always laugh at them when they cried. So when it came to me to get picked on and get my art supplies stolen by Jake, I thought Luke Skywalker wouldn't let this bad guy get away with it. He's a hero, and I can be one too. Jake got mad when I stood up to him, so he did the most sensible thing a kindergartner would do. He got up, stole my teacher's sharp scissors, and effing stabbed the scissors up my nose. Our friendship lasted all the way through middle school. F you, Jake. You know what? OP's got a point. Luke Skywalker would not stand for this. You know what he would do? He would get up. He would leave. He would disappear. He would go live in a hut and cry across the galaxy and then drink cow milk, okay? And then he would die. That's what Luke Skywalker would do. And leaving is what my father did. Next story. Story number 76. Oh God, my school was a complete crap show. But one dude takes the cake. First, he would take the city bus home every day. And unfortunately, I did too. His favorite hobby during this time was to throw food at cars out the window. Obviously, having an apple slam into your windshield in traffic is dangerous, but the bus drivers were always dudes that didn't speak English well and weren't being paid enough to deal with it. Eventually, one driver got pissed off enough that she pulled the bus over, got on, and demanded to know who threw the food. The dude didn't admit it, and his friend had to take the blame. The woman made him clean the food off her car under threat of calling the cops, and later, he was banned for life from the city transit. Continuing, he also enjoyed doing things with body spray and a lighter, where you can make a mini flamethrower with it essentially. One math class, he lit his book on fire, and it took him a solid 20 seconds to put it out. The teacher didn't notice. Then, he would constantly show up to class high on something. It was weed at first, but eventually it seemed like it was something else. I don't even know how he made it to school without falling into a ditch. And finally, he vandalized a ton of stuff, usually with chickens. But one time, he was caught drawing graffiti on the back of the local community center by the cops. Someone saw him and called, and this idiot tries to run away. But he literally just sits around smoking pot all day, so the cop easily got him. The next part is a bit sketchy, lots of rumors, but the story goes he tried to fight the cop and break a window on his cruiser. Either way, he ended up under house arrest, ankle monitor and all. This is high school, by the way. I don't know where he is now, but I'm sure he hasn't graduated and certainly isn't making anything of himself. Story number 77. I remember a kid came from a really tough living situation. Welfare, single mother, child abuse, and they moved around a lot. Took its toll on his ability to socialize. He was weird enough that even though we were in different schools for most of the time, I still heard stories from mutual acquaintances. First grade, went missing during a fire drill, then showed up later in different pants. Turned out he couldn't get the bathroom pass in time, pissed himself in class, then waited until the fire drill to make his move. I don't know where the pants came from, the office maybe? Third grade, was caught poking holes in the bus seats, looking through them and pretending he was looking at a striptease with his friends, then denied doing it. Also ran away this year and was found having set up a tent on the roof of his house. He had also ripped his shirt into gloves and a hat. It had been 1 hour. Sixth grade, got an in-school suspension for fighting a bully upperclassman in his first week, then tried to glue the dean of police to his chair with an Elmer's glue stick of all things. He was pulled out after that and went to private schools, dropped off the radar for a while. 12th grade, came back to high school for half a year. Super good-looking dude, mysterious, sensitive, popular with the ladies. He was also a pathological liar and made up a bunch of stories about being abused, said he bled black. Started leaving school in the middle of the day and got increasingly antisocial the more people got to know him. Still got it in with the goth queen and harassed her for a month before he vanished. He was later wrapped up in a love feud with his best friend. Weird situation with no innocence. She strung both guys along and they turned on each other. Heard he tried to unalive himself, but who knows. There's more, but I'm tired of typing. Heard he's got things figured out now, though. Story number 78. Not that kid, but one of my closest friends whom I love dearly, and with whom I got into a lot of shenanigans. Found small tubes of glitter that had openings the exact size of bottle rockets, literal glitter bombs. Made a taser and brought it to school in an Altoids box. Found a remote that matched the brand of every projector in the school and used it to F with teachers. Somehow got a key to most of the doors in the building, including the roof hatches. We did vinegar shots in chemistry, much to the chagrin of our teacher. The smell didn't go away for weeks. Convinced the worst of the two chem teachers to mix potassium perchlorate and sugar. Set off the fire alarm that day. Managed to somehow finagle her own office that was attached to one of our favorite teachers' rooms for a semester senior year. Got a job volunteering in the office and printed fake lunch leave passes for people. I also stapled my leg to see what it felt like. Surprisingly unpainful. And another guy with whom I am not good friends with once got in trouble because he stuck a paper clip into an outlet and somehow launched a fireball into a teacher's office, where the teacher was in a meeting. The same guy also caught a desk on fire by smearing it in hand sanitizer and lighting it. Story number 79. Oh, that kid. Yeah, I know who you mean. That kid was an amazingly good scholar, though, magna cum laude, and also wrote for the school paper, and wrote well, and was the guy in speech and debate you did not want as an opponent. He He was also extremely, almost cartoonishly conservative in his political convictions. He constructed highly intelligent arguments defending some wacky propositions. They made perfect sense if you accepted his premises. Yeah, that guy. Easy to assume he'd be a success in the world. He could get pretty passionate about an argument, but was generally a benevolent and intimidatingly intellectual guy. From time to time as I went through college, I'd have a passing thought wondering about him, what he ended up doing. That guy? Yeah, whatever happened to him? What company is he running? What think tank does he do research for? Maybe he's a staffer to a member of Congress or has an academic post or some policy job. Years went by, and one day, I read about him in the paper. He had been working a low-level job at a high school in Lincoln, Rhode Island as a scribe for special needs students. Known for being quiet and shy, and also a bit obsessive about germs, he wore gloves all the time. That was the most remarkable thing reported about him before his final act. Something happened, wasn't clear from the reporting what, but Jay lost his temper and got fired one day in 2008. Or he got fired and then lost his temper. It was a bit mysterious, but he was upset about being fired. So he loaded up his car with a bunch of cans of gasoline and drove to the school. Hopped a curb, drove straight into the school building and lit it up, turning his car along with himself into a terrifying firebomb. Students had been released for the day. There were a few staff members nearby, but no students. No one else was injured or killed. Just Jay. That kid. How did that happen? I wonder about that more or less weekly. Story number 80. In elementary school, we had a kid that would bring those Star-Kissed tuna packs with the mayo packs and crackers and eat each part individually, even the mayo packs, by just squeezing them into his mouth. It only took me once eating lunch next to him for me to never want to do it again. In high school, we had a guy that would routinely punch lockers for no apparent reason. We would all be walking to class and suddenly we would all hear a loud bang as he just shoved his fist into the side of a locker. He was warned several times not to do it, but he kept doing it anyway, and finally started getting ISS for each time he was caught, which was every time since all the lockers were in the same hall as the principal's office, front office, and counselor's office. Oh, and in junior high, we had two guys that were best friends, but would always get into fistfights with each other, usually over girls. It would get intense, too. One guy once threw a music stand at the other and shoved his head into a wall. It was advised to just stay away from them when they started fighting for obvious reasons. In story number 81, middle school had a pond between the main building and the gym. Last day of school in 8th grade, a group of kids unleashed a bunch of rubber ducks in it. Not a ton, because who has money in middle school, but enough of them to be noticed. A couple of years later, when my younger brother was there, a band played on the once-a-month TV program kids would produce in the school, which for the late 90s was pretty cool. Nobody really caught the name of the band, but it got them press in the school newspaper. Their band name was Pordlaw Kidkus. Then a kid figured out Pordlaw is the principal's name backwards, and yeah, apparently the kids were summoned to the office via a school-wide page. No just calling up the teachers that had them. So everyone, as we approach the end here, I have a question for you. What stories do you have about the school? Was that kid your friend, your neighbor, your sibling? Were you that kid? It's okay, you can tell in the comments. This is a judgment-free zone for the most part. And also, and one person mentioned it while we were reading the stories, the stuff you can get away with in high school, I mean, would get you punched in the face, shot in some places in the country, definitely arrested or fired, referring to out in the real world, I mean. Schools are either lenient or lazy, you choose, but I suppose these stories have allowed me to maybe greater appreciate my time in high school, because a lot of it pales into comparison to what we've read here today, or at least from what I've seen or heard or experienced. We had some stuff, but most of it did not compare to these stories. But anyway, guys, we are at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a really good day, and bye-bye!